Hello and welcome to Power Reflections, a proud member of the Duff Network where we reflect on Wildbow's most homegrown work as it releases. I'm Reuben Morehouse.
I'm Elliot Diebold.
And we're here for a Reflections episode for Shaking Hands, which means we've got a special guest. You may know them from their YouTube channel, you may know them from their live reads on the Duff Media Discord, or just their commentary on Wildbow Stories, the Otherverse in general. Or you may know them from that time that they appeared on our 24-hour live stream. It's JayManiac. Welcome, Jay.
Hello. Happy to be here.
Good to have you on here. I'm maybe going to embarrass Elliot a little bit, but I think he's mentioned this to you before. You are Elliot's inspiration for story breakdowning, so it's good to have you on the show finally.
I was actually trying to figure out how to bring up how excited I was to finally have Jay here. So that's that made my job easier. Yeah, like for real, if you have the time to listen to us potter on about this story for 90 minutes, you should come and check out Jay's live read. They're much better at reading the story than we are, so it's worth having a look at.
I don't know about that. I take longer.
Yeah, so by that metric, we're winning. I think if it's a sprint, not a endurance race, then we're in the lead.
Very true.
But yeah, so we are here to talk about Shaking Hands, Arc 9. So, I mean, let's start as we normally do by breaking down the arc. I'll start us with 9.1. We're in Lucy's head. She had a bad dream as Alpi passed her a message from Rook. Alpi kind of going a bit overboard with the bad dream, in my opinion, but, whatever. After a nice breakfast, she meets up with the other three Kenneteers, Avery, Verona, and Liz, and the four Kenneteers head to a meeting at Matt's house.
Yep, and then in 9.2, we see the rest of that meeting in Verona's head as she tries to understand or figure out why all these literal monsters don't seem to like her or want to be her friend. After chatting about the barrier and extorting some gifts out of the others during the meeting, the trio leave and have a nice chat with Nibble and Chloe before Matt and Edith make a very suspicious offer.
9.3. Avery zooms Zed zealously, and they have a nice chat and even begin the long road to Declan's de-shirtification. After this, she and Ronnie meet up with Ken to get a taste of city magic, a rundown of the town's casual racism, and the treasured possessions of recently murdered transients.
So the bonus material that week was Path Practicalities, where Avery teaches us all about the paths, including the new promenade that we will see soon. She also jots down some notes on helpful new practices she's picking up, including the Sharon Ball, which the grounding ball. Oh, we couldn't come up with a good pun name for it, but it's the ball that you throw at stuff and it makes them less weird, basically.
Yep. In 9.4, Lucy packs for a patrol and on her way to meet up with everyone else, discovers a cool new multi-fox form that she can pull off with glamour. She meets up with the gang.
Does she discover a cool new multi-fox form, Elliot? Or does she reveal that actually she's just been 5 foxes in a little girl costume this whole story?
Oh my god. It's all coming together.
Exactly.
So then she meets up with the gang and John, and they talk about his upcoming promotion before everyone catches the trail of some mysterious new baddie.
9.5. Verona leads the gang back to Matthew and Edith's for help. After the friendly receptionist Crooked Rook lets them in, the trio gather some allies and head back to the police station. Luckily, they're able to joker gas the civilians and capture one of the enemy trio. Back at Lucy's place, she reveals some incriminating data.
Avery declares that they need help as the gang have breakfast with Lucy's family, and the guests pine for a family that actually has a friendly breakfast. Inspired by this familiarity and friendliness, Avery heads off alone and tries to convince Melissa to not be a shithead for a few minutes, but is unsuccessful. In the end, Avery just trashes her bedroom instead.
Which, again, if Avery is trashing your stuff, you need to reevaluate.
The thing I loved about Avery trashing Melissa's stuff is later on it's confirmed Melissa's not even 100% sure that it was Avery. So Avery totally got away with it, which is fucking hilarious.
And so then we head to 9.7, which is from Lucy's perspective as she and Verona. First they stop by Verona's House of Horrors, aka her house. And after ditching her dad, they head to Matt and Edith's place, which is actually more chill. And there they decide to interrogate the homeowners before interrogating their prisoner. After extracting recognition that their motives are pure, they do turn their attention to the prisoner, and he spills the beans on his allies.
9.8 is from Avery's perspective. Snowdrop saves the lives of some kids by distracting them from their asshattery, while Avery flirts with their would-be murderer. She does some magical arts and cry to make some fancy new finder gear and unlocks the secrets of the powerful rain knife. Then the gang makes some compasses to track the carmine furs.
Twist.
Well, you definitely rewrote that part about the knife.
No, that's just in Elliot's little summaries here. I don't know about.
I really enjoy arts and cries.
Arts and cries. But yeah, the rain knife, Chekhov's knife that will hopefully be useful eventually, because it certainly hasn't been so far.
I think anyway. 9.z does make a case for situations when it's useful. I just still maintain those.
Yeah, unless we actually see it be useful, I'm not going to believe it. I'm surprised. Well, I won't talk about the April Fool's chapter here, I guess, but I'm surprised it didn't make an appearance in that. In 9.9, Verona heads home and begins warding the house to protect her dad. Without any gratitude for this, I guess, Brett takes his bullshit to the next level by breaking Verona's backpack and calling Jazz a bad mum, which are about equal levels of terrible crimes, I think. Verona takes these emotions and throws them right back at the furs, which she eventually finds and begins kidnapping almost immediately.
Then we take a quick break from that whole mess by jumping into 9.9's extra material, locations and events, which gives us some really neat maps of Kennet and helps us track where everything has been happening. This was really useful for me because I definitely had some places in the wrong spot in my head.
Me too. And 9.10 is from Lucy's perspective. Lucy starts to freak out about Verona's nosedive, but together the gang launches a rescue that knocks Edith off her feet. Regrouping in the ruins, the trio do some emotional recovery before splitting up again. Verona needs to watch the furs, and Snowdrop needs to watch Verona, while everybody else acts natural.
9.11 has Avery asking everyone from her parents to goblins for advice before her and Lucy try to stop Melissa from fucking things up even further. They find her talking to Regan's mother and don't quite succeed at stopping her from doing this before the Composite Kid and the Abyss Beast show up to wreck the party.
Yep, and then 9.12 is a big action set piece as Lucy and Avery try to help defeat the Abyss Beast and Bridge and all the sorts of intruders. Although really, it's Verona and John who end up doing most of the work.
Yep.
And then they meet up with the real Verona again, and everyone's parents gets together to try and make up for how much Verona's parents are not getting together. And we begin to search for a way forward for her.
9.z. Montague sets up delectable dreams. Tashlet's supportive and loyal, it seems. Crooked Rook's radical, not without basis, still getting her desperate pawns to their places. Ave and Snow prep a wedding, the venue resplendent, Fernanda and everyone else in attendance.
Oh god, that's good.
Yeah, nice. And finally, we finish with the magic item identification. Rather than help with the ritual, Nicolette and Verona have a quick lesson off to the side about identifying magical items, and we get some insight into the motivation of some of these gifts that were given by the Kennet others. But most importantly, Liberty juggles some goblins.
I will say, obviously, we're recording this after 10.1 and 10.a have come out.
And 14.12.
Yeah. But I guess I do just want to say, I wrote this, it was sort of ripping on how Nicolette and Verona weren't helping, but we learned right at the start of 10.1 that actually Avery and Snowdrop didn't put that much effort into the set dressing anyway. So
yeah, there wasn't much helping to be done.
They didn't even draw a circle. Like, God, lazy.
Such lazy bones, those two. Man, I feel like we say this every time, but it feels like it was a long arc, huh? Going back to like the bad dream that Lucy has about Booker is like, oh my god, that was so long ago.
Yeah, we've only been back in Kennet for one arc.
that made it feel very real for me.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, this is
You can fit two of the shortest arc in this arc.
Yeah, by chapter and word count, this is the longest arc so far. And I mean, yeah, what an arc. I don't know if it's like recency bias or whatever, but it feels like the centerpiece has got to be 9.9, where Verona and her dad have their little kerfuffle.
Yeah, that's a big chapter, isn't it?
Yeah. I think that I wanted to center the first part of this conversation on, if not that chapter, then what it signifies about what the arc is doing as a whole with Verona, because I think that's what a lot of us have been focusing on.
Yeah, makes sense.
And you guys have done a great job of kind of covering what happens afterwards and what this means for Verona and her situation, like with the discussion questions and with kind of assigning blame to everyone. But I think I wanted to focus a little bit more on what happens leading up to the moment and what Verona's arc was, what it seemed like Verona's arc was doing before the moment happens. And obviously it's the moment does seem kind of inevitable, but I still think that we were being set in a direction, and the moment with Brett was situated to knock us off course.
I can see that because 8.8, and the stuff immediately following it gave me this sense of like Verona had sort of stepped up after coming back from the Blue Heron Institute and was like claiming more of the space, like the way she was inviting Jeremy over, the way when her and Lucy popped by, she just told her dad that she wasn't going to do stuff. Like it felt like she was gaining ground, and 9.9 sort of comes in and says, "Nope."
Yeah, and it also kind of felt like she was struggling with different things. I mean, she was struggling with she was kind of avoiding the problem of her dad, and she was struggling with the domain ritual and Bristow, what she did to Bristow. Those were the two beats that we kind of hit at each Verona chapter. And now, like those things seem to have been kind of overshadowed by the moment. Of course, they tie in various ways, I think, but I think that Verona had her own struggle, and it even kind of knocked her dealing with that off of its course.
So, do you mean? Oh, sorry. So just
please.
to clarify what you mean, it's sort of like it all like sort of the progression she was making in all the aspects of her life just got completely knocked off by how bad this went. Yeah.
And now those things are just going unresolved as we try to handle this new thing.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose that's what people like Brett do in your life. They are.
Yeah.
I think the fact that Verona has kind of normalized a lot of the trauma in her life, and is like, that's her whole thing, right? To kind of squish it down and pretend that everything's fine. It makes it especially easy to not deal with things as new things come up if you can kind of squint your eyes and think, oh, Verona seems kind of okay. Let's worry about this next thing instead.
Yeah.
I was ready. I was ready to slap her at the end of 9.12 where she comes in and she's like, "Oh, it was just an argument about chores."
Yeah,
I was like,
God.
no, don't do this.
Yeah. And I guess to that end, I wanted to talk a bit about Verona. Well, because it's me, and I have my particular way of reading the story. I wanted to zero in on Verona's relationship to the structures of society. I don't know how much time we're going to have to get into it, but in preparation for this episode, I actually did prepare several pages of notes that we're probably not going to get into, but among them was this kind of I called it the Kenneteer trifecta, and it's kind of been a tool for me to analyze the arcs of the various Kenneteers in terms of their relationship to the practice. So, very quick explanation. Very quick explanation. The basis of it is that there are three aspects to the practice, and that each one has one Kenneteer that is just a natural at it. They're the story aspect, the society aspect, and what I called the sensory aspect, because I went for alliteration rather than descriptive terms. But yeah, Verona obviously is the story aspect. She understands the pattern, repetition, aesthetic cohesion. Those things are her bread and butter. Those things are the things that she understands and relates to emotionally, um, which we even have called back to, as she says that her reason for not donning the furs was because they were the wrong color. um, yeah, and so in this context, the arc or the arcs of the various Kenneteers will be to kind of grow to connect their aspect that they understand naturally with those of the other Kenneteers. So Verona needs to understand kind of people and their emotions, and she needs to understand society, as shown when she says that like practitioner history is not interesting to her, like it's the only thing that she's not interested in, as shown when she says, "Oh, you know what would be great? Being a part of a practitioner family." Um, and Lucy and Avery have their own various parts to that. Lucy needs to understand people and their emotions. Well, she understands people and their emotions in the context of society, but she doesn't really relate to them individually as much. And of course, she doesn't understand that the societal aspects of the practice, which she understands very well, actually relate to the mechanics of the magic. That's actually something that she does a bit of growth in too, this arc, with her whole karma situation. The karma situation being that she connects how karma works to like how we're told that God works in the Christian church.
The spirits help those who help themselves moment.
Yeah, exactly.
I really like this model. So I'm assuming then Avery would be she's got sense down pat. She's obviously very emotionally aware.
Yeah.
But obviously, we see the story and the society bits have thrown her in terms of her coming out and her constant failure to be the third person whenever there's need for a 3 beat of lines about stuff.
Yeah, and I think that Avery's was the one that was trickiest for me to catch, because I think that I understand the story and society aspects of the practice very well, and the sensory aspects of the practice not as well. But I think because of that, I can very easily identify kind of her problem, as if she only has one, but her problem with understanding the practice, at least in terms of she doesn't really get theory. She doesn't really have this model that she applies to everyone, or that she can apply to everything. She doesn't think in terms of structures, of power like Lucy does, or in terms of structures of story like Verona does. And that creates some problems, like, because she's very good at these individual connections, but she's kind of not tying them into a web when it feels like she should. Like, this is apparent in this kind of it's kind of a jokey throwaway line, but she calls, or she suggests the name Snoogie for Peckersnot, and she's like, that would be cute. And that's a result of her seeing, oh, goblin names are built off of rude things. So if I were going to build a goblin name, and like everyone loves cute things, so if I were going to build a goblin name, I would just I could take the like rude aspects of what this goblin is like, and then I could make them into a kind of cutesy name. And she kind of doesn't understand any systemic reason why goblin names are like that.
Interesting.
Like, why no goblins are named Snoogie? and all of the goblins immediately fix her with this "what the fuck did you just say?" stare.
Yeah, she actually would have literally, it would have been politer to punch Pegasus in the face.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's interesting. I guess one thing I'd question, like, or I'd want to ask you about this model is obviously the ideas of sense and society as two of the faces of the practice obviously reflect on our real life in very tangible ways, like being able to get a better better idea of society or get a better understanding of like sense and yourself and your emotions are obviously hugely beneficial for any person to do. But story maybe less like for a normal innocent person, maybe less obviously. Like I'm
Mm.
curious if you have an idea uh what lessons we should be taking from the way story works in the other verse and bringing it into our real lives.
Well, yeah, okay. That's kind of, I mean, that's kind of like the thesis of, if you had to distill all of my YouTube videos into one thesis, it would be like, story matters. We should be thinking about story, because story is kind of this symptom of society, in that like it always, our social values are very reflected by story. And the way we structure stories and the way we like, stories are a form of communication, so the way we teach people to communicate is going to be reflective of our values. And if we want to change the structures of power, if we want to change what we as a society are valuing, then we're going to need to do it through story.
Mm.
It's like, this is a story.
Mm.
It's it's a story in which we're finding all of the social aspects and we're bringing them to the forefront of the story, because we're trying to use those metaphors to highlight it.
I wonder if there's something to be made about the thought that kind of narrative tropes or kind of story elements in the Otherverse obviously aren't just powerful because they are stories that can be used to convey information, but kind of lend power to the act of whatever it is that the trope is being applied to, right? Using a 3-beat in real life has power in the Otherverse. And I wonder if there's a point to be made about if you as a person play into a kind of dramatic or story-based a way of living your life that lends you to greater, ability to affect the world around you through your words
I
or something to that extent,
totally think it does. Like I think
Mm,
we've talked about this before a bit, but like I think one of the core conceits of this world and why it's so strong is that basically this idea that stories and these patterns matter so much. Like that's just how human psychology and the human brain
mm,
works. So it's
mm,
basically extending this thing that our brains like to do, forming patterns and stories and making that actually really matter magically.
mm,
Um, so yeah, I guess to sort of extend Jay's point, like yeah, I can see you take that concept of story and it's like, well, this is actually a lot how humans deal with things and address them, and we take these stories and that establishes some of these patterns in our thinking. Um, so
mm,
yeah, yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Exactly. And I think we tend to contextualize the world through story,
mm,
and make we actually even tend to make the stories that we believe, or the stories that we reinforce, we do make those real. Like, there's this study done that I wish I had the link to, but um, they gave all the kids in the school a test, and at the end of it, they said that they told all of the teachers, "You're not allowed to tell the kids, but um, these kids are the gifted kids. They're the most effective. They're going to do the best, and these kids are not. These kids are not going to do the best." And they came back a year later, and it turns out the test was right. The ones that they said were going to do great and were going to be gifted were gifted, and they were great. The ones who they said weren't going to be, they did very poorly. And the thing about that is they chose at random. They just they 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 chose kids at random, and they told the teachers this story about how these ones were going to be elevated and these ones were going to be not elevated. And then the teachers, without ever telling the kids and imparting that expectation onto
mm,
them, just by the way they treated the kids, it reflected in their grades and it
mm,
reflected in how they were doing. Like,
That's fascinating.
and I think that that's a very interesting study when you talk about issues like systemic racism, systemic homophobia.
mm.
Um,
Well, I mean, it's proof
like,
that a teacher's perception on a student can have such a big impact. Like the way you treat someone kind of turns them into the way that that you expect them to be, right?
Well, and these
Right.
stories of how society is, don't necessarily. Well, you make them true, right? Like it's that thing where it's like,
Yeah.
if all these people of a certain race are poorer or whatever, it's like everyone thinking that means that they're not going to get the support they need to make that not true anymore. Um,
Yeah, exactly.
Like I think we did talk about this with somebody way back in the day, but it was like there used to be a thing in America where they'd sort of say, oh, African Americans aren't as smart or whatever, so they didn't let them go to schools, and then it was like, well, yeah, they're not going to school. Like,
Yeah.
why do we have to draw these two dots together for you?
Yeah.
Like,
I
yeah.
can sense we're starting to get into systemic racism, which is something that I think we will want to talk about. I mean, it's obviously to an extent a part of the story, like class issues and systemic issues. But I kind of want to raise one more thought about the kind of categorization system that you've raised here, Jay, which is, it's interesting to me. This isn't necessarily a point, but just an observation that Avery is someone who excels as that kind of sense or emotive and connective aspect. And Lucy is someone who excels at that kind of societal and structural aspect. That's both because they are, or in Avery's case, probably were outsiders to that, right? They were kind of outside of those systems and saw how they operated and have used that as a way to kind of leverage their understandings of it and really kind of dive more into prioritizing and valuing it. Whereas that doesn't necessarily apply to Verona's relationship with the story aspect, at least not in a way that I can tangibly put my finger on. I'm not sure if there's a point there. It's just kind of an interesting observation that both Lucy and Avery are outsiders from the thing that we now think of them as excelling at, whereas Verona is not necessarily.
I guess I'll leave this to Jay as well, but I'd argue like her dad and her mum, like she sort of had this terrible life and lost any story that she could find comfort in her home life, and that caused her to retreat further into fiction. Like we talked about her lying in the past and stuff. Like I think she had to rely on story as a crutch to make up for what her family wasn't giving her, which was a good story.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that is reflected too in like how many stories that you've experienced are in some aspect about romance. Like how many, if you have that concept of romance poisoned for you like Verona does, how many stories does that alienate you from? Like you say that like that Lucy is kind of on the outside of society. I think that Verona is on the outside of story in some sense because she doesn't have the same understanding of it that we are kind of all growing up with. Like, if you don't see a problem with the concept of romance, you just think it's natural and it kind of passes you by without a second thought, then yeah, that's not going to be really a thing that contributes to your understanding of story or your better understanding of story. But Verona had to think about that because the story that society tells is not the one that she grew up with, and she had to resolve that dissonance. And I think in resolving that dissonance, she became very good at analyzing.
Interesting. I like that thought.
Yeah, that's really cool. And now Jeremy's being roped in.
Well, yeah. I did kind of want to push back a little bit on you guys were very critical of Verona's setup with Jeremy, and I think that you raised a lot of great points.
Maybe critical isn't the right word, but it's just there are it's just such a delicate and sensitive thing,
I wouldn't have Yeah, maybe it didn't come across like, because I wouldn't have classified myself as critical of it, but like concerned at least.
Yeah, definitely.
But no, yeah. Sorry. What were you going to say? I'm interested to have this discussion.
I had a very different reaction to it, and that's not me saying that you guys were wrong, because you actually did point out a bunch of things that I missed because of my bias. But because of my bias, I kind of as someone who identifies with the label asexual, I associate with lots of people who are ace and arrow, and for whom the concept of romance does not function. So I kind of have a bias towards like, no, it doesn't have to be this way, and people can define it in their own ways, and that can actually be growth, that can actually be good. And I was very focused on that point, and I missed a lot of the things that were wrong with that point, like Verona's kind of she doesn't fail to set boundaries, but she certainly is not thorough as she's doing so. She and Jeremy are not comfortable enough communicating this for it to really be an airtight good thing. But I do think that Lucy and Avery's reactions to it are harmful. Like, no matter what way you spin it, if Verona's right to do this or if Verona's handling it badly, Lucy and Avery just going back to immediately jumping back to kind of the tropes that are associated with lots of friends with benefits situations, like they're doomed to fail. Then like how many romance plots or movies are based on like friends with benefits situation goes wrong because
They
like
fall for each other.
the concept of romance is inevitable.
I mean, I guess I would say
sorry. There's literally a movie called Friends with
Yes.
Benefits. That's exact premise.
But-
Exactly. That's like the vast majority of friends with benefits representation, and that's not the case with a lot of actual friends with benefits situations.
But looking at this specific relationship, it really does feel to me like it's doomed to at least not necessarily fail, but have problems, right? Like from the get-go of this, Jeremy has kind of had a different set of what he wants than Verona does. And they're both 13 years old, and I don't think they're at the point where they can comfortably, I mean, Verona's trying for sure, but I don't think they're at the point where they can comfortably have conversations about, you know, how can we have this relationship that has good boundaries for us emotionally and personally. But I don't necessarily think that's a problem, right? Like, this is kind of what Verona needs is to have a normal 13-year-old experience of, you know, having a boy that you do, you know, I kind of described it sometimes in my own life as circling the drain of a relationship, where you're kind of like in or out of this relationship and it's a bit weird and it kind of has problems and it has weird emotional bits, but that's what Verona needs, right? So it's
that is how you discover what you need and what you want in a relationship.
And that's what Verona needs to know, what she actually wants emotionally as a human. And one way for that to happen is for her to try and push for something and it kind of have some problems and need to be dealt with, right? Like,
I do think Jay raises a good point about like Lucy and Avery's reaction, because there definitely is a moment, I think it's in maybe 9.9, where Verona explicitly sort of thinks like, I can't talk to them about this because they'll get weird about it again or something like that. I will say
absolutely,
maybe she should reflect on how she treated Avery and Fernanda and self-reflect on how much that sort of reaction is a response to her own actions. But yeah, I guess it's interesting because like my concern mostly would come from the fact that I worry Jeremy certainly seems interested in a much more traditional relationship, and it'll depend. It'll become clear how well these barriers and boundaries have been defined later on with him. But I'm interested, Jay, if I don't know, maybe we don't need to get into this or something, but I'm curious if you do think Verona is asexual or aromantic or something.
I mean, no, I think that she does experience. I think we see that she does experience sexual attraction, romantic attraction. Like, there's the biggest evidence to that is like Jazz's. There's a part in Can We Talk About the Girls where Jazz is like, she does these nude drawing references and like. She does a few drawings of women, but like most of them are guys. And so that to me was like, yeah, okay. Verona's not ace. Verona's not arrow in the traditional sense, but she still does have this. I think part of the problem for me is that aromantic is not a term exactly because, or no, I mean, it is a term. It's not a thing in that it is not just one thing.
Yeah, well, romance is a very different thing for everyone. I think, yeah,
and but like also romance is this kind of pillar of society. Like we're told all of these things about what romance has to be, and so if I'm asked whether Verona is aromantic, like the concept of romance as presented by society does not work for her, and therefore yes. But also like the reasons for that might not be what one assumes when uh, talking about whether someone is aromantic.
Yeah. Okay. No. That's sort of okay. That's more or less my feelings as well. So okay, cool. Just
But yeah,
because yeah, I think a
I
lot of it for her, yeah, is just that segregation from the story that we've talked about. It's
Well,
it's
it's definitely enough of a factor, like her damping down her emotions constantly, that I wouldn't feel comfortable ascribing any kind of label to Verona, because I don't feel like we really know what she is when she is a like when she's not actively suppressing her humanity, I guess is how I would put it.
yeah, but it's not the cape and the shard. It's
Mm.
you can't analyze them separately.
Mm.
Uh, Crossing boundaries a bit there with that, but
We don't talk about that here.
yeah.
I know. It's just that I reverted to language that I knew that you guys would get.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, that's sort of the whole part of all this story stuff is if you make that yourself enough, it becomes the case, both tangibly in Pale, but also just in real life. Like if you are constantly suppressing your emotions like that, it changes who you are. Um, I'm not saying that is
Yeah,
a good or a bad thing. It's just a thing. In Verona's case, there's probably room to shift it in some directions to be healthier. But yeah, like I wouldn't
yeah,
necessarily say her relationship, like situation, is one that it needs to go in any direction. It's just whatever makes her happy. What we need to do is get her to a
yeah.
spot where she can figure out what the fuck that is.
So, do you think that this whole thing with Jeremy, like, I mean, do you think that it's doomed? I mean, of course, that's an answer that changes after Brett's
Mm.
higher
Mm.
um, explosion there. But I kind of came away with a more optimistic version of it. Like Jeremy clearly has things that he wants that Verona is kind of ambivalent towards, but I am wondering if you think that he could reframe his notion. Like, is this even possible? Like, if Verona handled this well, better than she's been handling it, could Jeremy change?
I definitely came away with it with a sense that there were ways it could work. I think there's going to be at least one, moment where they're going to have some sort of serious talk. But I don't see this as a thing with no hope because yeah, like I
Yeah.
mean, we've seen like Verona can learn to care about people like Lucy and do things for them and stuff, and like that maybe she'll be able to give Jeremy what he needs just through like them forming a close friendship like that. I don't know.
Yeah,
Well, yeah, I definitely see the potential. Like, I see potential for it to work, but like, I'd be surprised if there wasn't at least one moment where something happens and the two need to sit down and talk some stuff out again.
Yeah, I definitely wouldn't call it doomed, because I think it's something that they both do want. But I think there are definitely going to be one or two moments of emotional tension in their relationship. But it's still a relationship. That's it. That's what happens.
yeah, absolutely. And I think what irritated me about Lucy and Avery's reactions, and yes, they're understandable because uh, I can guarantee you that Verona has zero sense that this is related to the Fernando and Avery thing. That is just way the fuck over her head. Um, but I think what irritated me about those reactions is that they are kind of they're kind of getting in the way. They're kind of providing an obstacle because Verona clearly knows that something is not quite right and wants to talk it out, but feels like she'll be alienated for it, and so is not talking it out. And that, if anything, is going to be a contributor for it going wrong.
Yeah, I can see that. Like, she needs somebody to talk this out with, and like maybe Tashlet will be able to fill in for that on their road trip. Um,
Yeah,
Yeah, we'll see.
And I think that Verona building this kind of relationship with Jeremy is a part of a larger movement in her arc. And the context for this comes a lot from the first half of 9.9, the good half of 9.9, we could call it. Because I think that what we see throughout this is Verona kind of trying to build a lot of her own structures for things in ways that she has struggled with throughout the story and throughout the first part of the arc. Like, she's we see it with her work ethic, we see it with how she chooses to approach things, and they're not perfect systems yet, but she is making progress in building something that's her. And I think we can even see it during, like, we keep calling it the moment, but it's actually like quite a long dialogue before the quote unquote moment. I think we see it a lot there too in Verona's retorts to her dad, because he brings up a lot of these problems that she's now been addressing by building her own systems. Because I think the systems have never really worked for Verona.
I think the way she stands up to her dad, it involves a lot of her calling out how he hasn't been doing enough for her. It's like I feel like she finally says some stuff in that regard that she hasn't really expressed to him as concretely before.
Yeah.
Like she uses that improved sense of society to challenge the job he's been doing.
Yeah, exactly. And improved sense of, like, well, the sensory aspect and the society aspect, I think, to retort. Like,
yeah, fair.
She's understanding, like, that the things that he's saying do not line up with the things that he says other times. That the narrative that he's pushing is a very fragile one that falls apart under any really scrutiny. And I think what Verona used to do is just kind of ignore it and not scrutinize it. And I think that was maybe contributing, or maybe like feeding into the pattern, because she ignored it. She just let it sort of wash over her, and she let that be the only narrative, even as she was uncomfortable with it. But like here we see, like, Brett talks about like his 2 jobs, and Verona's like, the second job you have is really fucking easy, and you brag about how easy it is. Like, that's never something we've gotten. And like, we don't see Brett from like almost anyone else's perspective besides Verona. So like, it makes sense that the fact that we've never gotten this before means that Verona's kind of never thought about this before. Like, Verona's putting this together now because she's actually taking the time to scrutinize what he's saying, which is all the more tragic because he does the opposite of the same.
I will
for her.
I will say I think there was one time early in the story where he did mention what that second job was and that it was kind of easy, but like not to this extent. But like I think there's maybe one time early in the story where it sort of briefly comes up, but it gets so quickly swept under the rug of, oh, I'm doing 2 jobs, that it's like, yeah, it really takes for Verona to be like, isn't your second job nothing? Like, what do you want about? Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't remember that if that was a thing.
But it's like again, to your point, it's one very small throwaway reference if it is in there and I'm remembering correctly. So it's like
and Verona clearly doesn't reflect on
exactly.
it any of the other times he brings up his second job, and I think that's part of what we see her for her growth. But yeah, we just see a lot of very good reflection in the first half of 9.9. Like, not all of it is perfect. Like, you guys were critical, and I think rightly so, of her whole, like, oh yeah, actually being a bird helps me examine my emotional state. Like, does it? Are you sure? Are we sure about that? But she does kind of approach, like, she does kind of think critically about the way that she's approaching work.
Yeah.
Like, she calls it like the paralyzing pile of fuck that's that's been piling up over the summer, and she thinks about ways to deal with that. Like she's preemptively texting Bree back so that it doesn't like pile up, because she knows that she'll have resistance to handling that problem later. So she's just doing it right now, working it into the flow as she's thinking about it. She's, I think, really coming to a better understanding of who she is and how she functions and how she can work productive tasks into that functioning instead of just coasting, as her dad accuses her of.
Yeah, I do. I think the concepts that Verona is lazy and doesn't try very much stems from, well, her dad and him pushing a truth that maybe made it a little bit true. But it's like, yeah, we have these moments where like she's an incredibly capable and hard worker. She just needs to be able to forget her home life for that to be the case.
Yeah.
Um, when they go to the police station in this arc, she's the one who tidies up afterwards, and it's something she barely thinks about. I think that's 9.6, but she just kind of
Yeah.
happily tidies up, and it's like that's a whole thing for her normally, but she barely even gives it a second thought this time.
Yeah. And I think this is where I have to mention um, an interpretation that myself and several other people have kind of been mm, analyzing the story with, which is that Verona might suffer from ADHD or autism spectrum disorder, or any or just executive function in disorders in general, because a lot of this is kind of reminiscent of that, or reminiscent of symptoms that are uh, very common. I was able to assemble a page of notes based on uh, symptoms that she has that correspond with executive functioning disorders. And the primary one being, like, people with executive dysfunction have so much harder of a time doing the things that they are told to do. Like, that takes such a mental toll on them. And there are solutions, though, because people with executive dysfunction, even though they have a very hard time doing the things that they're supposed to do, working towards long-term goals or working through multi-step activities that are prescribed to them by someone else, they do work on things that they are emotionally invested in, and they do it pretty automatically and pretty easily. Like, that's a very common trait. If you want to train an executive dysfunction, or someone with executive dysfunction to do a task, for example, you will involve them in the rewards process. You'll have them uh, prescribe themselves rewards. You'll have them build themselves charts. And if you do that, if you allow them agency to kind of restructure these things to a way that they understand, it works out a lot better. The normal parenting advice does not, it kind of just bounces off of them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I won't pretend to have much familiarity with this stuff. But yeah, I mean, this is because this is a conversation I've sort of had with people, and I guess, yeah, I don't know. I have tended to push back on it a little, just because I personally relate a lot to the way Verona thinks and acts and responds to things, and I just part of me's just like, isn't that normal? Um, I don't know. Maybe I'm not aware enough of the nuances.
Mm.
But I don't know. I think I mean it's interesting then. Do you like do you think a diagnosis or something would be a huge step in her journey in that case?
I think that the important thing for her is that a diagnosis would dispel a lot, because obviously she doesn't need a diagnosis for her problems to be valid,
Yeah.
but I think that a diagnosis would dispel a lot of her dad's narrative. Like, uh, the narrative that Brett takes is that um, Verona is lazy, that she doesn't work very hard, that she can't put in effort, and that's her fault. Whereas this diagnosis would recontextualize, no, it's actually taking you way more mental energy than it quote unquote should be by society standards to do these things. Like, no, it is not just doing the laundry. It is not just this. It is not just mowing the lawn. It is for you, it takes way more than everyone around you is telling you that it should.
Yeah, So I say that. So it's like it would help in the sense that in that it's validating, I suppose. Or
Yeah.
okay.
And it also might help in terms of like figuring out coping mechanisms, although I was going to say Verona has all right coping mechanisms, and she does kind of in the first half of this chapter like figure out some pretty damn good coping mechanisms for this shit. Like the working everything into the flow, the texting Bree back before it becomes added to that pile that she can't think about. Like that is some top tier coping mechanisms. That's what's recommended. Her coping mechanisms are not perfect in the story. Some of them are actually very harmful.
I mean, she does have a lot to cope with too. It's the other thing.
Yeah, but like with a diagnosis, the important part of a diagnosis is like you, instead of turning to the societal standard of what should happen or what people say should happen, you are turning to this kind of more niche societal standard of what should happen. And I think that would be important, because if a neurodivergent person looks up like ways to cope with this, they're going to get the neurotypical ways to cope with this. And if they try them, they will not work. So it gives her access to knowing that about herself would give her access to information that actually relates to her in a way that would be helpful, where everything else that she could access does not.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. But yeah, that was my spiel on that. So.
Yeah, I think usually one of the things we do at the end, or towards the end, is ask who is the best Kenneteer and sort of force our guests to pick one. I think the fact that we can spend an hour talking about Verona maybe makes that redundant, so I'll just ask it here.
I mean, like, I could beat around the bush. There's a lot that I think that I have grown into a much more nuanced version of Verona is my favorite since the beginning of the book. But like at no point has that statement ever really stopped applying.
No, I'm good. I'm like, it's good to finally have somebody else who's on that page. We get a lot of Lucy and Avery stands in here. I think this might be the first time I outnumber Reuben.
The thing is, I do a lot of the chapters that I find most interesting are Lucy's chapters, which is fascinating to me. I think that her arc is very fascinating to me as someone who, because I kind of started at story, but I grew very naturally into society, in terms of like the Kennet trifecta, whereas Lucy sort of has society down, but is not growing as naturally into story. So I see her get all of these things that I get, and I go, well, yeah, you get it. You just have to connect it to the thing. See,
that was like
you could get goblins so easily. Just you're so close.
A big part of this is why I was weirdly kind of glad to have 9.9, because I was the same. I was like, I've always sort of stand Verona, and then but I kept being like, yeah, but my favorite chapters probably are Lucy's implement ritual. And so that it was like 9.9 may have taken the slot of my favorite chapter, and I was like, okay, good, now I can say my favorite chapter is the Verona one. I mean, the other thing I used to say, like, as somebody who really liked Verona and related a lot to Verona, it was like, well, yeah, I like the Lucy chapters because they're best friend. It's just makes sense.
Yeah, and for a while, I think that was also kind of my reasoning, but because Verona does not have great self-reflection skills, so a lot of the best analysis of Verona actually did come from Lucy's chapters.
That's fair.
So that was definitely an early win. I think that, just while we're on the subject of Lucy, very quickly, one other part of this Kennet trifecta is that I think Lucy has it the most spelled out in story, that she's advancing towards these two kind of pillars of understanding. This she has society, she's advancing towards self, and I called it self. I've called it sensory in the past, but I think they're kind of related. She's advancing towards the sensory and story aspects, because she has these two mentors in story, Guillerme and Booker, who kind of represent those. Booker is the sensory, Booker is relating to people, Booker is pushing her to relate to people, pushing her to kind of just be friends with people, relate to them, maybe stop baring the teeth so much, and don't stop connecting it to the society aspect, but maybe tone it down a bit. Like when Lucy's interrogating Nicolette or interrogating Corbin right after they've had terrible emotional experiences, it's kind of like, yeah, I get it, I really do. And in fact, I, as I'm reading, often do forget that they've just had these terrible emotional experiences, because I'm very interested in the politics and all of that. But Booker's kind of the person pushing her to be more chill about things.
Yeah, like the Corbin and the Nicolette things were very much a bit where it's like, okay, you're not wrong, but now's maybe not the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting because she did definitely come into this story with this bit of a guilty until proven innocent treatment of most people, and he is maybe moving towards a bit more of a not just treating them as neutral until proven one way or the other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think Booker is pushing Lucy towards that, but in the kind of Kenneteer diagram, that role is filled by Avery at the moment.
Yeah.
And they'll all kind of grow to be able to fill each other's roles eventually. And Guillerme is the same thing for story, like fairy, of course.
Who
Glamour.
better?
Glamour is art, glamour is story, glamour is all of that. And Guillerme is a very interesting example of a fairy, because while he is still a fairy, he does still understand these concepts very clearly. He is also a fairy who has lived longer than most fairy that we've ever seen, presumably. Or at least he carries that air. So he understands also society's problems. He doesn't just lecture to Lucy about this. He also kind of tells Clem that this is what she needs to be thinking about, is society's problems. And I think that it's important that in the one lesson that we kind of get to see out of Guillerme and Lucy's sort of training exercises, Verona is also there, like very intentionally. Guillerme is, I obviously he's not as involved in Verona's arc, but he's kind of trying to pull these two to a joint understanding of story and society. And he even points at Verona several times throughout that lesson, is like, you could understand story like Verona does.
Yeah, that's interesting. I never made that connection. I love that. But yeah, I mean, it is interesting that Guillerme has not interacted, he's taken Avery and Lucy under his wing in very explicit ways, but apparently just been content to leave Verona with Marisica, which is, I'm fine with this. That's okay.
I mean, part of it, I think, is that he doesn't have as much to teach Verona, or No, that's not true.
Also, just keep her
just
away from Marisica. Like, is more. I'm like, got to get her away from.
well, yeah, but then it wouldn't be as
Yeah,
fun.
no, that
Elliot.
you're right. That is absolutely the
It's all
reason.
about it's all about the fun. It's all about the fairy. I love how this arc has fucking nothing to do with fairy, and I've already fallen off the wagon.
Oh, it's like one of the very last things in that 9.z extra material, and why this was on my mind is like the Verona like measures the positivity of each of the gifts, and Marisica's glamour is bad, and Fernanda's like, it's not because it's a dark court glamour, and Verona's like, what could this mean? And it's like she left by the coin. Like, Verona, we've known this since Arc 3. Like, I think
she also gets the summer rose.
Yeah, that was new to that extra material, right?
I think so. Like, I didn't note it because it was very naturally kind of like in there. It's like, we know they've had a source of glamour, but we didn't know it was this.
Yeah,
And
you're right. That is, we sort of touched on it in our episode about how it was like that rose was perfectly designed to help moderate Verona's glamour tendencies because of the way it, like, the more you use of it, the slower it's going to grow back. So she can't just dive headfirst into making herself a cat or whatever permanently.
I almost wonder if, because we know glamour's kind of all about story and aesthetics and perception, the fact that it slotted in so naturally into the story so much that, like, unless you're really paying attention, you're kind of just like, oh yeah, like they're doing all the magic items, the rope, the summer rose, like all the ones that they've already collected. Like, that makes me think, like, did Guillermo just sort of hand this to them recently and just in a way that made them think it's always been something that they've had? Like, I don't know if you watch anime, but there was this one arc of Fairy Tale. It's not a good anime. Where
you're really selling it.
That is how most anime conversations do tend to start. And I do the same thing. Like, I watch too many CW shows, and it's always like, yes, in the Flash.
Yeah.
Now, also, don't watch the Flash, but in the Flash.
Yeah, but in Fairy Tale, a wizard joins the guild for an arc and like acts like one of the main cast, and he's a memory altering wizard, so he's just like implanted all these false memories for everyone, and like he's just like around, he's just here with all these people we recognize, and we as the viewer go like, who the fuck is that guy? But everyone's acting like they know him, so we're just like, okay, guess he's always been here. But I feel like the summer rose, I'm getting a very similar feeling. It's like, this clearly wasn't always here, but it kind of like none of them are realizing that.
Yeah,
so.
well, I mean, we have seen memory alteration stuff like the Hungry Choir. Obviously, like people like
Matthew's
Louise
kisses
to forget things. Although normally I thought practitioners were immune from that stuff. So I don't know why that. I don't know why the story would be doing that, but it's definitely not impossible.
No, I mean, like, it's not impossible because it's just kind of wrapped into the way you perceive it. Like, whether you perceive something as there's this concept that Heidegger, I think it's Heidegger, is it Wittgenstein? There's a concept that an old white philosopher says that's it's like whether something is ready at hand or whether something is not. Like, your doorknob is ready at hand. You do not have to think about it. As if you like enter your bedroom, you just reach out, turn the doorknob like it's always been. If something is present at hand, that's the word. It'd be like if your doorknob was removed. You go to reach for the doorknob and you realize, oh no, the doorknob's removed. Now you're actually thinking critically about the situation. Where the fuck did the doorknob go? So part of our perception of things, and we know that glamour is the practice of altering perceptions, part of our perception of things is whether they are ready at hand or present at hand, whether they feel natural and like they've always been there, or whether they feel like a new thing, whether they feel like something we should be thinking about. And so Guillermo could have just like reverse pickpocketed that into their stash and just made part of the glamour around it that it doesn't seem odd.
Interesting, but why would he do this?
Yeah, what's the thought? I mean,
Or maybe it's, if he's going to be falling to winter soon, maybe he wants to give them a self-replenishing source of summer glamour before he can't make that anymore.
Oh, that's a really good point. That's kind of sad.
That's a pretty tragic read on it, but it could be.
He gave them a farewell present, but wiped their memories so they didn't see it for what it was.
Harsh. Ouch.
Yeah, that would be very tragic.
I mean, obviously,
But
in
like-
1412, we have just seen what his winter form
yes, of
looks
course.
like.
I did a 45-minute live read of that chapter. It was amazing. You also did a live read. That was also cool. But yeah, I don't know. In the previous gifts received stuff, we kind of, or like their packing lists and stuff, Guillermo's glamour was always just this pile.
Yeah.
And I wonder if he just kind of like reached into the story and retconned that. Sort of just was like, what? Pile? No, that's what Marissa gave you. I gave you a rose. I'm dramatic like that.
Yeah. I just
Anyway, that was a bit of a
it's always interesting to try and think about why Wildbow / Guillermo / the story, because these three may not be distinct entities. That's my new tinfoil. Why they've done this thing.
I mean, you don't have to sell me very hard on that. You've seen my worm videos.
Yeah.
But I think that's why the fairy have always been so wonderful. It's because they kind of act as the audience, the writer, and character all rolled into one. So they kind of want the same things that the audience wants. It's like drama and fun and spiciness, and their machinations are going to reflect that.
Yeah, I always feel I have to be very explicit whenever the fairy involved, and I'm like, oh, this will be fun in the fairy sense. Or like, yeah, I can't wait for this as a reader, not as a when I see
I completely forget to draw that distinction all the time.
When a fairy's coming up to like a human character, I'm like, oh, this will be a lot of fun for me as a reader. If this was a real human person, I'm horrified.
Yeah.
Now, to quickly switch on to one of the other things that you had written here that I'd love to get into. You've got some stuff here about Crooked Rook, who obviously we were introduced to at the very end of last arc and got to see in this arc. The exciting new addition to Kennet.
See some of. I wonder if she's always going to be in the background of this story, or if she's going to take center stage a bit more as it continues.
I think that as long as we're functioning in the heads of the Kenneteers, like she knows how to avoid that lens. And she even kind of knows the possibility that Tashlet will tell them things. And if Tashlet does actually remember to tell them things, she's going to adjust for that. And suddenly Tashlet's not going to be in on anything either. And I think that the lens of the story, I think that our characters will have to actually outmaneuver Crooked Rook before we see anything else, unless we get it in an interlude.
Yeah, well, it sounds like they might be on that track with Tashlet's last thoughts in 9.z.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
I kind of have this picture of her. I almost feel like she's shaping up to represent a third side in the upcoming conflict when the Carmine murder shit hits the fan. Because I don't think she's on the same page as the culprits, but she's also not necessarily going to be on the same page as the Kenneteers. So
yeah, definitely.
I think she's just gonna complicate the situation further by basically having a third set of motives and pushing people in a different group of people in a third direction. I mean, while Toadswallow would be sitting in the corner doing whatever.
Yeah, Toadswallow has already got that. Like,
Yeah, you're right.
sorry, Crooked
The
Rook.
nth
Move over to
side.
fourth side.
Yeah. No, you're right. Yeah. Well, Toadswall will be doing his war profiteering trade, like helping all the sides or something. I'm sure.
I see. I'm increasingly just confused by Toadswallow, and
Right?
I don't know how to feel about it because like there's that moment in this very arc where the Kenneteers are like, you guys want to work with us,
Yeah.
right? And Monty's like, sure do. And Tashlet's like, yep. And Toadswallow's like, uh-huh. And it's like, what?
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't expect him to just say yes there.
Yeah, it's a
Like,
weird one, isn't it? Toad is
since
one of the ones that I
5.d.
feel like I just can't place.
And like it's very curious because he does have this understanding of the practice and of history that's kind of like it showed itself in the BHI conflict, but it hasn't really been like it wasn't really around before that, at least not in terms of the Kenneteers. Like he never, I guess he shared some aspects of the practice with them, but since they were obvious aspects to us, the Pact readers, I guess we didn't know them as much. But yeah, then there's the detail that he does seem to care about. I see the problem is like I don't know how much he cares about people
Yeah, well, I
or
suppose
how moral he is.
when he said yes that he wants to work with them, maybe he meant it in the sense that as a good representative of his shareholders, he wants to work with all parties.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a possibility.
But no, I agree. He
I
feels
think
more actually on their side than just.
Yeah.
But then also when we saw him in 5.d, he was clearly so self-interested, and we have seen he's cut ties with people like the Teds, who he did really like when he had to. So
yeah, that's another thing. It's like he had this relationship with Liberty in America that clearly left a very big impression on all parties, and he doesn't seem to give a shit
yeah,
exactly like explicitly, right? Like here Verona's like Toadswall's like explains his whole deal of like, I actually ran away because they were going to bind me. Like all of that. And then Verona's like, should we tell them that? Should we tell Liberty and America that,
yeah.
like, why you left and everything? And he's like, oh, I don't give a shit.
I love that accent.
Fuck, dude. Yeah, I don't know.
Like sometimes
I don't know about that guy.
I reconsider. We've had that pale predictor theory, and we've talked about it a couple of times that he's actually a winter fairy impersonating a goblin. And sometimes I almost give that credibility just because I'm like, well, to explain why he's fucking bonkers and weird. I don't know how it actually answers any questions, but it makes me feel better for not understanding the pieces.
I dare say. No, I don't think he's. I think that was a more plausible theory before we knew a lot about what Winter Fairy were like.
I don't think it's plausible, but like I'd be lying if I said it made less sense than most of my other ideas, So
I mean, I think that we're going to get something more about exactly how he's breaking the rules because I think it is more than he has let on or more than we've been privy to. Like,
him having something up his sleeve feels inevitable.
Because part of it is just that, like, well, not all goblins are like the goblins that we think of when we think goblins. Like, some of them are very knowledgeable, some of them are very cunning.
Yeah.
But also Toadswallow has these like moments where I'm just like, I don't know. Well, what exactly are you?
Maybe he's being possessed some of
them. He's part fairy, part goblin.
Yeah. Yeah, you know how Clem had the goblin and fairy that sat on her shoulders? After she got rid of them, they were merged into one. No, I don't know.
Yes, of course. I mean, I think that, well, what stuck out to me, there's a part where they're describing the Oni, where Corbin's describing the Oni, and he says, dress a goblin up in glamour as one of the examples of like how they break the
Yeah.
rules. And that immediately, I was like, why am I picturing Toadswallow immediately when that happens? Like,
Yeah, well, because that was one of the big early surprises from the Blue Heron part of this thing is that how well traveled he was specifically at the fairy markets. Oh, it was the extra material that went over the fairy courts, and he was just
yeah, and
so well traveled.
he continues to demonstrate knowledge. Like he's like, you could fetch a pretty penny for her on the black market. What if I just stepped in before you could sell her?
What if?
Been the first bidder.
What if going back to my third side comment? What if it's not an accident that Crooked Rook found her way here? If he is a little bit Oni, they're in it together.
I mean, Oni is a uniform. They are a collective. They do maybe travel in packs, although for Rook that seems to mean, I'll just go somewhere and then I'll make some more Oni.
Yeah, well, I imagine the thing with Oni is as soon as you get to the point where you can prescribe a decent label to them, that no longer stays the case.
Yeah, it applies in a way that's going to bite you in the
Which
ass.
is a little similar to goblins in a way. They also try to resist being categorized to some extent. But yeah, I imagine like as soon as you get the Oni to the point where you can say this is true about them, I imagine that by design they're starting to fuck with it.
Yeah, and that can lead us into talking about Crooked Rook, who has evaded our conversation once already. Tricky bastard.
Coincidence? I think not.
She breaks all the rules.
Exactly. Yeah, so we get our first look at Crooked Rook, and she's just awesome, isn't she? Like, from the very first, I think that she is my favorite just description of an other so far. She's competing with a lot of really cool descriptions, so yeah.
Do you mean visually? Or
like visually, yeah, visually is the main thing I'm talking about. I think it will reflect to her other facets,
Yeah.
but like just visually, those 3 paragraphs were stunning. Like she has a dress made of panels, she has her mask, she has all sorts of weird things, and I could picture it. Like it's all weird, but it's all flowing.
Yeah.
Just from one thing to the
And
next.
the box imagery was so fascinating because you could just see all these little parts of herself where she can open up compartments and have shit inside. Like so it was so like imaginatively stimulating because you're like, God, she's like a fucking Inspector Gadget.
Yeah. And she's painted in sunset colors, the Tasakare, the magic hour where the rules break. So that's just every part of her is like you can read like with it's kind of the opposite of Miss, because Miss there's just not enough visually to read into a lot.
Yeah.
But with Crooked Rook, the rabbit holes go so deep that you just can't keep track of them anymore.
Yeah, and I'm sure that will be the first and last comparison to Miss that comes up in terms of Crooked Rook.
Uh-huh. Yep. I'm just looking at the rest of the notes here. Seems to be. But yeah, the first thing that I'd just like to note is that Crooked Rook is a very good and a very rare example of a leftist antagonist that is actually portrayed well. Because she is an antagonist. She's against our protagonists. And that will play into the story, but she doesn't kind of fall into a lot of the pitfalls that a lot of people tend to fall in when writing leftist characters politically. Like, I mean, Amon and Zahir from
I was
Legend
literally
of Korra,
just thinking of Amon. I was like,
fucking
I'm still salty about how that
abysmal.
ended.
Abysmal examples.
I feel like all of the Legend of Korra villains, except for, I guess, Kavira, are like leftist villains, you know?
Well, all of them are extremists. I think that
But
this isn't meant to be a Korra show, but the 4 seasons of Korra are all about different kinds of extremism and how you can take anything too far.
True, but
The
like
issue is, particularly
even season 2 villain whose name I've forgotten. Does anyone remember it? I can't remember it.
Unalaq.
That's right.
Unalaq is also a terrible example of a leftist villain.
Right, like
because
he's trying to promote the kind of reunification of this world, right?
And he can be most accurately read as an eco-terrorist.
Yes, I think
environmentalist.
Yeah, it probably applies most to Unalaq and Amon, not Zahir, but the kind of idea of, well, he says he's a leftist, but really all they want is power, which is the reveal at the end.
Or that they have to twist what they represent to such an extent to make them the villains. Like, the reason I'm still salty about the way Amon's thing works is because nobody ever gets to address the fact that he had a point.
Yeah.
Like they have to like be like, oh, see, because he wasn't like living up to the standard, that means that the whole thing doesn't count and we never have to talk about it again. And it was like, no, well,
yeah, it's shallow, isn't it?
Like, yeah.
And he also very clearly like represents communism.
Yeah.
And like, but that's problematic, right? Because like he takes away people's bending, and communism is about taking away people's taking away rich capitalists' capital and redistributing it. And in Amon's version, it's just in Amon's version, like, since he's taking away bending, like bending is something inherent to you, a part of your personality. It's like the whole show just reads as like, oh no, but my money, it's so,
well,
it's such a part of me.
He's not redistributing anything.
Can't
He's
take
just
it away.
destroying. He's not building anything up. He's only pulling down.
Dark Knight Joker's version of anarchy.
I mean, I would say as well, like when we're recording this, Falcon and the Winter Soldier is about halfway through its run.
I know.
And I can't help but tie this conversation to that.
I was thinking about this too, and I was thinking, should I bring this up?
No, I'm thinking about it like I'm looking at the what are they? The
Flag Smashers, which is such a, I mean, they're I don't know. I mean, they might. We're still at this point. What, episode 3 has just come out, and we're kind of teetering on the line of, are they going to go fully that way or not? We'll see.
Yeah. I'm going to have I want to give it 3 weeks before I feel comfortable in the opinion I have of that show, but I'm concerned at this point.
Yes, exactly.
Especially because the way that the villains are introduced is, it was like they just want no borders and like freedom for all.
No,
and it was like,
Elliot, no, please no.
It was like, wait, and these are the baddies?
Yeah, I know. Said completely.
Yeah, and they're being fucking welcomed by working class people.
Yeah. I mean, it can't be.
They're so socialist coded.
Oh God, they can't just be. It has to be self-aware. It'd be too ridiculous for them not to be like. For them to just make them villains. I think that the show can't be that way, but we'll see.
It's even like, it's the same thing that they had with Amon, where it's the red symbol. Just put a hammer and sickle in it already.
We'll see. I still am holding out some hope that it's going to be a little bit more complex, but...
Yeah, I mean, Sam's arc obviously ties into a lot of
Yes, exactly.
Same concerns.
Yeah, but it would be just like Marvel to do Sam's arc very well, except for the entire way that they
exactly.
The realistic endpoint is going to be, this is the good way to break down borders, and this is the bad way, and forget about all the stuff that we showed humanizing these villains, because actually one of them did a bad thing once, and therefore we can shoot them all or something, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, off track.
And it's not that off track, because Crooked Rook is a very different example of a leftist villain, where she's still definitely like left coded. We had the entire, like, Lucy spells it out for us in the Oni conversation. And Lucy keeps spelling it out for us because Lucy and Crooked Rook are not very different.
Yeah.
But she's distinct in that she's, for one, this whole notion that she's just doing it for power, or like she's just pretending to be a leftist in order to accomplish some other goal, that's entirely dispelled. Like, she doesn't even she's not even like the fairy kind of scheming.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed that distinction so far.
So have I. Because it's so fun to have a villain who sneak attacks and deceives, but not like that. It's hard to kind of categorize, but she is so open with it. She's open with everyone about her intentions. Like, she's not Marisica, where she'll go to the meetings with the Kenneteers and then like interject something that like pushes them in some direction. She's just like, no, I do not intend to cooperate with you. I don't like you. I think you're bad, and I'm just going to not even engage. Like, and she tells that explicitly. She doesn't deceive people or say things that she doesn't mean. Like, she's very straightforward with each person about her intentions and about, like, she doesn't kind of try to paint a really great picture of her cause and try to make it seem like there's nothing wrong with it, because if she did, she'd have Composite Kid like that. Like,
Yeah.
She just says, here's the situation, here's what I can do for you. You will live for 3 years. I can make it 51. We could work out the details of that. And I don't know, I found it really admirable. I also, like, you had a bit to say about, like, it's a threat that or she says, like, I'm not going to threaten you to Tashlet, and you kind of had some pushback on it, like that is a threat, what she said, but I kind of think it isn't. Like, she's just, because, like, she's not implying a threat in the same way a mob boss would. She's just saying what she'll do if you react a certain way to what she's telling you. Like, it's very open, it's very communicative. It's not the sort of implied threat. It's just like, this is how it's going to have to be if this happens.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose for me there was still that, maybe that bit of an undertone of like, you will be against me if you do this. I don't know. Yeah, maybe that's not fair. I do think you're right though, that like Crooked Rook, she doesn't feel manipulative, I think, is the difference. Like, as you said, she's very similar to Lucy in that she's just going to tell you how it is and just judge you based on how you respond to that.
Yeah. And, like, yeah, I just think it's really admirable that the story took it in that direction. The story didn't go, look at this, like, charismatic, manipulative person who's deceiving all of the people that she's recruiting. It's like, no, they're joining her because she's right, or that she's, like, convinced them of her point, and it's not through trickery. It's just through, she presented the point, and they were like, yeah, I mean,
Yeah. Well,
like, how much pushing is it really going to take for Bridge to fall under her sway? Like, he already knows all this shit she's saying about practitioners.
Well, I mean, that's a good thing. I don't think the story is trying to make out like she's wrong. Like, this
Yeah.
was my big issue with, like, Amon in Korra, is that it was like the story had to bend over backwards at the end to be like, so he didn't have a point, did he? Um, Whereas, like, this story is like, yeah, actually, Crooked Rook is pretty much on the same page as the Kenneteers on like 99% of this. Um, she's just going to work at it very differently. Like, I don't think it's I don't think it's an accident that as Lucy is pulling on the brakes a bit about how violently she tackles things, and like learning how much care she needs to put into things, that Crooked Rook has entered the page.
Yeah. And I think that part of it is that she thinks about everything systemically, kind of like Lucy does. Like, she thinks of things in terms of her boxes. She thinks of things in terms, like, her realization that she talks to Tashlet about is about the boxes and the labels that society has. She sees each of these as systemic issues. That's why she, like, I kind of have no doubt that no matter why a practitioner tried to do the domain ritual, whether it was for conquest, like some practitioners that we know, yeah, I'm saying Alexander, whether it was for conquest or whether it was genuinely, like, for sanctuary, as the domain ritual was rooted in, I have no delusions that she would do anything but the exact same thing, which is oppose it and successfully just deny them the sanctuary or conquest, no matter what it is.
Yeah, it's going to be so interesting to see where she goes in terms of interacting with the Kenneteers because of stuff like that. Like, I think that very hard line in the sand that she's probably going to draw is going to be the point of contention for some of these things. And it's like, there's also this other whole angle that I find fascinating about people like Crooked Rook, which is that she's defined herself so much by not being inside the box that she's literally defined herself in boxes. Um, it's like this unavoidable thing
Yeah.
where when you're opposing the system that much, you kind of end up inverting it in such a way that the resemblance can still be there. Like I I
But
am jumping ahead a bit, and
but
I know
that's
you touched on this as well, but like Miss to me serves as a much better counterexample of how you avoid these systems because she actually has managed to exist outside them, whereas Crooked Rook has just defined herself by their exact opposite, which comes out looking a little bit the same in some ways.
yeah. There's the when you break free from the systems, you kind of become them. But like Miss is here to say, like, well, do you?
Yeah.
Like is that inevitable? Yeah. So let's get into this comparison because I think that that's gonna be a lot of where the story is taking this and a lot of where we're going to take it in our conversation. Because immediately when we are introduced to Crooked Rook in the new Others extra material, Matt is like, this reminds you of Miss. You're on the right track.
I feel like that was
the story is not being very subtle about this comparison.
Yeah, I think everyone's sort of like, oh, okay, this is Dark Miss. was very much the vibe I got.
But and I think that that's kind of true and kind of not because they're approaching things very differently.
Yeah.
But also the Rook and Miss comparison gives us the fun little detail that they might map pretty well onto Lucy and Booker as kind of where the logical extremes of those ideas.
Yeah, I can see that.
Lucy as Rook if she doesn't Lucy as Rook and Miss as Booker. I really want Miss and Booker to have a conversation. I know it'll mean like terrible things for Booker if he's at the point where he's having a conversation with Miss.
That's like the most monkey's pawable wish I've ever heard.
Well, it's like
I know.
They just talked about it in Pale in Comparison the other day, where I think it was Malia said like, "Oh, I really enjoyed this character. I hope we never see them again."
yeah.
And it's sort of like, like that's a nice.
That's the best you can hope for, isn't it? Yeah.
I agree. I mean, I joked once about Booker becoming Lord of Kennet, and like it was a joke, but also, I mean, if it happened, I'd be okay with that.
And I also like even now as I'm saying it and talking about it more, I'm like, no, the comparisons don't stop there because like if we take this metaphor to its extreme, who are the practitioners? Well, they're wealthy white people. That's kind of the that's kind of the people who are perpetuating the system. And Booker says that he would trust Alyssa to actually be one of the good politicians in the same way that Miss reaches out and creates the Kenneteers as an institution, like kind of elects them to handle this situation. Like they both extend trust over that line, whereas Lucy and Alyssa are they're working on it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think the fundamental difference that we're going to see between Rook and Miss is that categorization. Like they're both very aware of how labels and boxes work, but it's for very different reasons. Like Oni, we know, are associated with masks. Rook talks about things in terms of labels and definition boxes because her art is one of redefining those boxes for the sake of liberation. Like she'll kind of lean into some of the labels so that she can find ways that they apply that the practitioners aren't thinking of. it's redefining those boxes for the sake of liberation, or at the very least gaining an edge over the forces which oppress. Miss is explicitly rejecting the labels, even as she has to know how they apply, and how they actually prohibit her from certain avenues. There's this quote in 5.d where she basically, when she meets the finder on the paths, she thinks about how this is going to go. He says, basically, I don't need to give you anything to get information from you. I'm just gonna enslave you. And Miss is like, neat. Okay, what are my options? And she says very explicitly, she can't attack, because to become an armed attacker is to become a label. People tend to ascribe label to their attackers.
Well, that's moving her in
Master
the direction
otherwise.
of the ballerina, like her best mate, the ballerina, who like is now a part of Falling Oak Avenue and is like
Yeah.
like a lost that has been categorized and labeled by the other finders. It's sort of like if she took on this role of attacking finders who came into this other path, she could get sucked into being the equivalent of the ballerina for it.
Yeah. And I think that's really fascinating, like that she thinks about how attacking is not an option because that forces her into a category, like how attacking the system or attacking the practitioners of the system is playing into it in some cases. Like, I don't know. I think it's just so cool that she thinks about things in that way, and that she has like intrinsic character motivation for these sorts of systemic social implications.
Yeah, well, and how she's gone off to try to build her own thing rather than tear the others down, I suppose. Like she came to Kennet was trying to turn it into something.
Mm.
Yeah.
And like honestly, before Crook was introduced, I actually didn't think Miss would ever come back before the epilogue, but like now there's a chance, right? Just because I'd love to see Rook like have to accept the fact that I don't know, Miss did better because she managed to trust the Kenneteers and focus on building rather than fighting.
I think the answer to that question
Yeah.
for me depends on how much we think Rook is going to play an active role in the unfolding of the story. Like, I don't know. I can kind of see Rook being a character that exists in the background for a while and gets some epilogue setting up, like, oh, this is what she's going to do next, but that's not kind of part of this story. I don't know.
I think she plays
I
off
think that-
Lucy and Miss in such interesting ways conceptually. That, like I almost feel like she has to be a part of where things go.
Also, like, she has this, and we'll get into it in a little bit, but she has this conception of like, well, I've seen a lot of places like Kennet, and I'm working towards the good end. So like, we're gonna get to see her make some moves that impact the end of the Carmine Beast resolution, and I think that's gonna play into the story.
I mean, how have we not? It's so mean that we haven't got more details on that. She just like first time we see her drops this line about how she's seen this happen a bunch of times already, and then we haven't heard any more about that. It's like that's so mean. I want to know more about what she meant.
I also just think it would be really fun if Miss came back and was just like, "Oh shoot, Rook's here, damn it," and Rook's like, "Oh fuck, Miss is here, okay." Like they know each other. They like play chess sometimes or whatever. I'm thinking of chess not because she's a Rook, but because I'm mapping them onto Charles Xavier and Magneto, which is another reflection of this dynamic.
I mean, that's always
Magneto's
a fun
another
trope,
leftist
is
villain.
when the villains are old friends, or I always love those moments where characters who you think are both big deals and then they know each other. It's always fun.
Because like, how could they not know each other, right?
I guess it depends how atypical Rook is for an Oni. Like maybe there are dozens of Rook likes around North America.
I mean, Rook is the box Oni. Like we're gonna. I mean, I think I don't know if I don't remember if you guys brought it up on the podcast because it's just been such a basic assumption for me. But I've been under the assumption that that Rook is the Oni who is responsible for the Oni trio that we see in the BHI.
See, that's interesting
one
because
who was trapped in
that
the
came
box
up when she
movies.
was first introduced at the end of Arc 8, and I pushed back against that idea. Um, at least back then, I'd be like, it hasn't really gone either way, but I liked the idea of there being more Oni around than just the one. I suppose was my main thinking behind wanting
Yeah,
there to be more than just Crook. But I mean, yeah, the idea that she was trapped in a box for ages, these three let her out, and now she's able to do
and
shit
like
like show up in Kennet.
I don't get the sense that every Oni like the problem I have with that. I agree that it would be fun if there were multiple Oni around. However, I think it would be less fun if we saw that they all operated like this because they have a very similar. The box Oni and Rook operate basically the same. They take these others into a box, they alter their characteristics, and then they set them loose just to fuck with the practice. And I don't think every Oni operates like that. Like I think that the Oni don't operate any one way because that would make them way too predictable.
That's fair.
So
I guess my thinking was that I didn't think the box imagery would be super unique just because that, like, literally the foundation, the one sentence summary of the Oni was that they were trying to escape the labels and the boxes. So the idea that multiple of them would have leaned into this breaking the box imagery didn't seem crazy to me.
Yeah, and I suppose Rook makes a reference to her sect of the Oni, so like it could just be someone else from her sect of the Oni, but like I don't know, like I don't get the sense that there are two Oni in this general area.
Yeah. I mean,
It
there's
just
definitely a
doesn't
fun
make as much
side
sense.
to Miss being those threes. Sorry, Crook being those threes only, just because they did like more or less fuck all in the resolution of the blue hair and stuff. Like the idea that it was like Mrs. Trio that she actually put work into that changed that place a bit. I mean, Mussa's in charge now, so yeah. But like,
Well, yeah,
they just went there and were students. Like they didn't challenge anything.
exactly. And I think that that's what makes it so fascinating is because if Miss is this box Oni, and I've very rarely considered the possibility that she isn't. But if Miss is this box Oni, then we have such like we have that other parallel, which is that they both set up trios of practitioners. And so by looking at the way that they did that and how they handled that situation, we can see even more of this picture of Rook and Miss. Like they choose their squads based on vaguely similar criteria. They want they want people that are very far away from the typical practitioner families. And in Miss's case, people that are very far away from typical. But for Rook, well, first of all of the Oni trio were practitioners before. That's a thing. Rook never created more practitioners.
When she used them as a
Like
means to an end, right? It was to get her out of the box.
yeah, exactly. She uses them as tools and then drops them as soon as she possibly can instead of actually trying to like improve them or recruit them for the cause. It's yeah, I don't know. Like yeah, and look how it turned out. They just all ended up in Alexander's camp. Like I they didn't they could have been different. She didn't try to reform them. She had them do her tasks and then she left. And presumably she did it on a very open basis. Like, I just want you to do this, and then I will teach you this. And she did that as many times and only as many times as it took for her to get out.
Honestly, that's very reminiscent of like the way a lot of the practitioners are forced to deal with each other, like making deals and not extending each other any trust or like treating each other like people. Like it has to be a written in the law deal for it to count.
Yeah, but she doesn't act that way with others.
Yeah.
it offers them trust, she offers them favors, but like because these three are practitioners, she can't let the relationship rely on anything but their absolute word and the transactional agreement, because to her that's all practitioners respond to. Like any extension of trust will just be capitalized upon and then turn against her. It's a very antagonistic relationship. Yeah.
I mean, I suppose okay. Even if the box Oni from that trio is just a member of her sect and not Crook, it is that's still saying something about how her sect operates, even if it's not her. But then I suppose at that point it may as well be.
Yeah. Like I don't see why at that point you don't just make that a thing.
The question is, who put her in the box? When we get
Maybe
to the
Miss put her in the box.
interlude.
Yeah, who knows?
I wonder what piece of the chessboard Miss is. Because I always thought a rook,
No, yeah,
rook was an odd choice because, like, I suppose it leans into her straightforward attitude, but it's like one of the most within the box pieces I would have thought because it just moves up and down or left and right. Like,
But she's a crooked rook.
it can also access every part of the board.
That's true. I'm just thinking like a
And
knight seems like the cooler one to me if you're trying to like be unique because it moves in a funky way. I mean, spoilers for Arc 10. Avery's think so too. So
yeah. I'm not quite sure about that, but yeah.
I'm not a chess master, so like that's
I also have no idea. I haven't played chess.
I'm just thinking
since
like if you're
grade.
trying to pull a sick move that puts that catches everyone off guard, the knight feels like the piece to do it with, not the rook.
But she's also the crooked rook. Like she doesn't move like a rook.
Yeah, that's fair.
I don't know.
So it was a weird question. I just thought I'd put it out there.
Yeah, no, I think it's worth thinking about. Yeah, but yeah, I think that the ways that they handle their trios are very like, to Rook these are practitioners, to Miss these are people who happen to be practitioners.
Yeah, I like that.
Like Miss is not concerned with the label as much. Like she is concerned with the label in that like she knows what it means, but she doesn't want to focus on it. She wants to make them into good people, and she doesn't let her prejudice against practitioners get in the way of that. Whereas Rook just sort of drops her trio as soon as it's necessary, or as soon as it's possible. And I think that the way they turn out is just representative of how Rook's ideas might not be the way to make systemic change happen.
Well, it's a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy, isn't it? Like if you're going to treat them like that, you're establishing that that's how they should operate.
Yeah. And like she could have been teaching them every step of the way. Like these were kids who were liberating others who had been unfairly imprisoned. That's like their whole thing. So she could have been like using that as like a teaching moment. I don't know. Like if it were Miss, she would have like a whole spiel about it of like, yeah, see, look at the oppression that practitioners perpetuate, and here's how to not do that. But I don't get the sense that she ever communicated with them any more than she needed to. And she never let them view it as any more than a transaction, because to do so would like open her up to more attacks. But like because of that, they never learned. And I think this actually relates to a pretty common critique of the way that leftists do things, which is like when we alienate cishet white people, when we alienate Republicans and exclude them from the structures of liberation, then they find it easier to like turn around and cling to someone like Jordan Peterson or Ben Shapiro. Like, of course, people shouldn't be taught. Of course, oppressed people are not obligated to be nice and compromising to their oppressors and people with bigoted beliefs. But like, I don't know. I just think it's in their best interest at that point to try to talk that through.
I feel like the thing there is it's like if Crook is never going to think anyone who is a practitioner can be good. whereas like Miss wants to build or get practitioners and help improve them. And you can see like the trio have made Zed and Nicolette better people to a bit. Like it's sort of like it's about getting practitioners on your side and getting them to help stop other practitioners being dicks. Um, whereas
Yeah.
like or like if Crooked Rook's fighting against even the practitioners who are trying to help, um, that's not necessarily going to help anyone, including herself.
Yeah. By snatching away their chance to be part of the solution, Rook just lets them be a part of the problem.
Yeah.
That's yeah. And I think that she has the same sort of view of Kennet. This is where I'm going to bring back the part where she's apparently seen lots of situations like this. Like, that's how she thinks of things. She's like, Kennet is a situation like all of these ones that I've seen before. And I think that we could do that too if we wanted. Like, we could relate Kennet's situation to any of the dozen socialist revolutions that happened
Yeah.
in various countries that the CIA like assassinated the leaders of and marched troops into and generally fucked with. Like I think that's not too much of a stretch to say like those are the kinds of situations that Rook is thinking of. But
Even other social movements like, all the stuff that happened in the 60s and things, and then obviously you look at it today and there's still racial divides. Or,
yeah,
like gay marriage is legal, but there's still like so much thrown at people. Like it's that sense of like her being like, yeah, well, we've seen things that have tried to fix stuff in the past and maybe it sort of did a bit on the surface, but it didn't fix it fully. So I'm gonna, burn it to the ground or something.
yeah. Like I live very near San Francisco, and San Francisco was this hotbed of like of just civil rights, of like uh different ways of doing things. Like there was this entire counterculture movement in San Francisco that's just kind of not there anymore. Like it's still a very progressive place, but the hippie communes don't exist.
No, well, there's
Like
a few tech bros for every hippie commune now is the problem.
yeah, that's
Sorry, Ruben and
that's a
I also
problem.
lived around there for a time, so
Yes.
this is probably something all three of us have opinions on.
Yeah, and I've been in those circles, so I know a bit about that. Yeah, it's Silicon Valley is a nightmare. In any case, Miss doesn't like we see her think about Kennet and what she wants from it. Miss doesn't think about all of the other ones before this that have happened. And there's a read where like she just hasn't experienced them and that she doesn't know about the other times that things like this have been tried or that things that Rook thinks are like this have been tried. But I don't know. I don't get that read. Like, she's very knowledgeable about the Seal of Solomon and how it came to be. She's very knowledgeable about the precedents that are set.
Hmm.
She's very knowledgeable about everything. And it seems like it's not just that she doesn't know about any of these other situations. It's that she's not, she doesn't care what those other situations did, or she doesn't think that she's doing something that has been done before in this way. She's not trying to make Kennet one of these. Like, Crooked Rook is trying to make Kennet one of these that ends well.
Yeah.
Miss is trying to make Kennet Kennet. And I think that's so important, especially when we contextualize it in like Rook thinks of the trio or the Kenneteers as practitioners, and Miss thinks of them as Lucy, Avery, and Verona.
Yeah, I really like that. Again, everyone, this is why you should be following Jay's live read.
Yeah, a lot of really
The
interesting.
only excuse not to is that I think there are Pact spoilers in there sometimes. So if you haven't read Pact,
Unfortunately, yeah.
there is a way to fix that problem. Just saying.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I don't know. That's kind of my take on the politics of this new Kennet situation. Like, and of how I think the struggle for Kennet will go. Because Rook will, like Matt even says, Rook will make Kennet into something. It's not just to get a good ending.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Here's a question.
Miss Hmm?
Because obviously we've seen. I don't think Matt and Edith have done the best job of continuing Mrs. Vision, both in the sense that Edith clearly had a part in killing the Carmine Beast, but also just they've done a pretty shit job. Um, they obviously offered the trio the domain, and I still don't fully understand what their motivations might have been for that. But what do you reckon Miss would have thought about that idea?
I am not sure. I think that she I don't get the sense that like she is against domains. I think that like everything else she analyzes, she'll analyze it based on the situation. Like if I don't think she'd begrudge someone taking a domain for safety reasons or yeah, for sanctuary. Uh where she would begrudge something like Alexander's. Aha, oh, I have a domain. Now it's going to give me stuff. Um, and I think with Verona especially, she would want it. She would want Verona to make her own decisions. But if Verona came to the decision that she wanted a domain, Miss would understand that. Like, I don't think that Miss wants Verona to stay in her house. I think that Miss probably wants Verona to have some agency over like what her life looks like. So
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, I think the thing with domains as well is we saw in the domain textbook thing in Arc 6, there was that one family and they were like building a barrier out of domains. So the big thing was is the domains were staying there even after the family members died. Whereas we've seen other ones like Alexander's that more or less shut down. And I don't know what the rules are there, but like this is the thing that irked me with Crooked Rook stuff is it's like if Verona can have a domain that she sets it up so that it's not that area is not her domain when she dies, like is that so bad?
We've seen this conversation pop up a lot recently of like, can you swear a domain and just say, oh, by the way, when I die, I don't want this domain to continue to be uninhabitable. Like, I get the sense that they say Alexander's domain is still important, but it's not a domain. Like,
Yeah.
he's left his mark on that space. And I think that has implications like that like it's kind of yeah, no, I'm just gonna say it's colonization.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
we can decolonize somewhere, but like we can give them their freedom back. Can we ever really like can we ever really undo the effects of colonization? Some people like have their cultures wiped out. We have in Australia the Stolen Generation. Like there have been very active uh, attempts to wipe out aspects of culture, and lots of them worked. Like,
Yeah.
can
So I see what you're
we
saying. Like
really undo the damage?
any new domain is like a new development on land, I suppose. And I suppose it is a question
Mm,
of can you have an agreement that when you no longer need that house, it goes back to just being as it was before. And I suppose if we're going to hold to the metaphor, the answer to that is probably not really. Um,
Um, I think that it could be, but it needs more than just lip service of, oh, by the way, I want to give this back to everyone after I'm done with it. Like,
yeah,
I think that because we see some of the crazy fucking shit people pull with their domains. Like they're their own gods in there. They're fucking with all the physics. Like, what the hell are what the hell is that space going to look like? Is that space really just going to assimilate back into nature? No,
how
its
could
laws
it?
were
Yeah,
broken.
exactly.
Like,
The kind of radiation fallout from that would have to be too strong for that to happen on any reasonable time frame.
yeah.
yeah, you made gravity fall up. Like what for 40 years? No.
I suppose you need someone setting up like a wildlife sanctuary for others as their domain for it to really feel like something.
No, but I think that like you'd have to you'd have to do it you'd have to make the fact that it's not yours and it's not going to stay yours a part of the process. Like
Hmm.
you'd have to I think like it's the difference between there are farming techniques that destroy the land but yield more short term, and sometimes short term means like a human lifetime, but eventually it will render the land useless. Also, we can see it with like coal and fossil fuels. Like they're a lot more of a short-term gain, but eventually they will, like, they're depleting a resource that is going away. They're harming the environment. They're causing global warming. Like, I think that if you wanted to do domain in a way that would be able to be given back to the world and to, like, for others to potentially inhabit in the future, you'd have to kind of set it up like a self sustaining system, or like an environmentally, it's like making it environmentally clean. It's like reducing your carbon footprint. The less you, like, you're not going to be able to get all those short-term gains that people want from their domains, uh, if you're trying to do it in this kind of more temporary way.
Yeah, I like that interpretation. I guess it's interesting. We'll,
Anyways,
we'll see, because
yeah.
obviously Avery and Snow are heading in to do the familiar ritual. Lucy did the implement one, which always felt to me like the most like okay of the three. Like just it's hard to make that one oppressive compared to the others. I'd be interested to see if the trio do a
No.
domain.
Mm.
Yeah, I I don't know. It's something that's kind of left sort of out there as of this arc, because Verona's thinking about it and Verona's struggling with it, and then like so many of the other things, it's just kind of knocked off kilter by
Yeah.
um her dad. So
I think the key to
we
me feels
don't
like
get
the
to see
fact
it
they're
ourselves.
already tied to Kennet as a space, and I wonder if there is just some sort of way to have a soft domain that is not just like Verona's domain or something, but something where it's like it's theirs as the practitioners of Kennet, meaning it belongs to the Kennet others to a degree as well. I don't know. This this
Yeah.
would all have to be post the murders situation, because that's gonna affect things. But I wonder if there's a way to turn the ritual onto the town as a whole and improving things for everyone through the concept.
Yeah. And I think they could already be sort of doing that with Ken.
Yeah, exactly.
Like Ken's already sort of just cool with them. Like Ken's just like, yeah, go, do your thing.
Yeah, I can't help but feel that Ken
Looks
likes
good.
them for the wrong reasons, though.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And like, there's all this, like, is Ken really like the, Ken as the average or median of Kennet? Is he really like representing Kennet, or is he just sort of representing the like mob rule of Kennet? Like, is he really representing, like, that? That's the thing that I like with. I think that that's the reason we like Nettie a lot more, is because you get to sort of isolate a kind of part of Ken that's more other. Whereas if you just get Ken, it's just the average. It's like the epitome of society, like Lucy says. It's the epitome of everything that's wrong. Um,
Yeah. Well, I mean, and obviously there are worse things than pure democracy, but like Ken kind of exhibits why it's also not a foolproof system. Um, I mean, I can think of elections that have gone in bad directions in the past decade. Um, like, yeah, I don't know. This is maybe just the thing because in Australia we have compulsory voting, and so I mean, like everyone has to vote or you get fined. And what that means is you got a lot of people who don't know what they're doing, voting and contributing to the vote.
Mm.
And like people who actively go there and they're like, I don't know or care how this vote goes, and their voice is just as important as everyone else's. And it's like,
yeah.
that's the flip side to the idea that in other places all the people voting are the ones who are more extreme or something. Like
Yeah.
Ken as a concept resembles that part of Australia where it's like when you give everyone the same voice, what you end up with is just like a lot of apathy.
Mm.
Yeah. But then, yeah, it's not really all that much better in America, because America has a different problem where, like,
Yeah.
being an informed voter is not actually the thing that gets filtered for by that. It's being a passionate voter. And that's not the same.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's the thing. Whenever somebody claims that compulsory voting is good or bad, I'm sort of like, well, I don't think it's that simple. I think there's these pros and cons to both. Um, and I mean, I guess that's sort of the same. Like we met Nettie and we love Nettie, but I'm sure there are aspects of Ken that we'd probably hate. Like if you go to there's probably another part of town that is just all of the worst parts of Ken.
Yeah, like we didn't get to see Ken when Nettie was off doing her own thing. Like, I bet that guy was a jackass.
Yeah, exactly. Like
Yeah,
we
true.
got to meet Nettie and she was cool, but for every Nettie, there's probably another equal representative who is just the worst.
Yeah, it's not quite a Kingston Brown situation. For all of our for all of me and Elliot, who are the only people who listen to Unsleeping City and read Pale.
We were
watched the
both told-
first episode. Huh?
Jay and I were
Okay.
talking about this the other day because we've both dropped Unsleeping City references in our live reads, and it doesn't seem like anybody else has picked up on them except us.
Yeah.
I'm currently working my way through Bloodkeep, which I'm enjoying quite a lot, and then I'll probably get to Unsleeping City or maybe Crown of Candy afterwards.
Unsleeping City is fun. Elliot and I, I'm sure, will do a whole podcast about that. No.
Yeah, it's great. As well, it's urban fantasy, so if you're enjoying Pale, could be up your alley. That's all I'll say.
If you enjoy City Magic, City Magic is pretty much the name of the game. There's
one of the main characters is basically like a cross between Ken and like Ulysses, like one of those chosen ones. It's like if Ken had a chosen one sort of deal.
But really, I don't know. Really, all of them are kind of
that's fair.
Have aspects of City Magic. Like one of them is a paladin of civil safety. That's kind of a City Magic deal. Anyways, this has gotten off
we've got off track a few times in this episode, haven't we?
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, these are 90 minutes, right? That's
This is going to be such a long episode.
Where were we before we got? Look,
We'll have to release it as a two-parter.
Look, I was trained by We've Got Ward to estimate podcast.
I mean, there's no time limit per se.
Yeah. But where domains? Talking about Verona and what Miss would think. That's probably about where we were.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm still kind of iffy on whether Verona will actually get a domain or whether that would be a good thing.
Yeah. Especially in Kennet. I know they're tied to it, but also, yeah, I don't know. You're 13. Don't tie yourself to a place forever, even if you kind of already have a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. But actually, like, Verona thinking about the domain ritual, actually, no matter what she chooses, just that she's being forced to reckon with this is leading to growth, I think, in how she's thinking about things, because she's always had trouble connecting. Again, it's story and society. She's always had trouble connecting that the practice is society. Like, she talks about being an other, and the first thing I say is like, okay, so all the things that all the structures in society and all of the things that you want to escape, you're just going to be leaning into them. Like, that's what others are. Others are people who are victimized by these structures even more. Like, so Verona realizing that, and I think she is coming to realize that in the past few arcs, is very important. Like, she thinks about the domain, and for her, it's always been like, practice stuff is fun, but society stuff is bad. Domain is a practice thing. Domain is a very cool practice thing, if I might say so. You get to be a god in your own like little space. It's dope. Hell yeah. But Verona thinks about that, and she thinks about Ken and how he resembles her dad in some ways, and she thinks about how she would be tying herself to Kennet in a way that's irreversible. She thinks about how she would be playing into the systems that she dislikes. She pretty much explicitly spells it out. And she keeps doing it too. Like, at the end of all of this is at the end of 9.3, 9.2, whichever one is the Verona chapter. 9.2. All this is in 9.2. She even thinks about like her plan to become an other and how that's not going to work, like explicitly, like now it's self-motivated rather than just Lucy and Avery motivated.
Yeah.
Like she's thinking about that would just be another huge set of responsibilities and problems that are the same as the ones that I'm trying to avoid right now.
Yeah, also a lot of her motivation came from this idea that Lucy and Avery were becoming more powerful and she hadn't even picked a specialty or didn't have an implement, and like basically all the worst reasons to make a lifelong commitment of like keeping up with the Joneses sort of stuff.
Yeah. And she thinks about change here and how she doesn't want to make permanent changes to herself. And she doesn't think she's ready for that.
Progress.
And that's pretty much what we've been wanting her to think this entire time.
Yeah, it is progress.
So,
yeah, it'll do.
Or will it? Because it is progress that immediately gets snatched away. And she immediately is like, well, had to resist wanting to wrap myself in the furs again. Like it's progress. She's thinking about it. It's not exactly a habit for her to be thinking like this. Her habit is revert back to become an other. Everything will be fine. Don't worry about it.
Yeah. Well, and we'll see how
I'm the Carmine Beast then.
I mean, we'll see how all that goes because she does that end of 9.12 where she tries to just be like, oh, it's just a fight with my dad. It's fine. And nobody lets her do that. And I think this will all tie into her journey on this trip with Tashlit, and I guess her mum will be there too, to try and sort some of this stuff out and make sure she's finding a way forward.
Her mom will be there too is just the most Verona's mom statement. It's like,
I'm still not over where Verona was like, yeah, usually when my mom has custody and she takes us on vacation, she takes us to the beach so I can read books and she drinks with her friends.
That's good parenting.
Oh, boy. It can be good parenting. If everything else was going well, that would be good parenting.
Yeah, no, like giving your children space, great parenting. Verona doesn't need more space from her mum. Yeah, it's all context dependent, and yeah, this isn't it.
All right. So, did you guys have anything else you wanted to talk about, or?
We haven't talked too much about Avery, so I just do quickly want to give a shout out to this path that is really more of an arc 10 thing.
Yeah, we'll get to that next arc, I guess.
Yeah, like she had her own little journey to sort of get there, and I think the arc, like the path, is seeded in this arc, and it's obviously just so perfect as a kind of everything the story is doing in general, and also just with Avery. Like as soon as we read that, I think it was at the end of 9.3, we got that extra material. I was like, this is the perfect path for Avery. I can't wait.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the path of paths.
Yeah, I think to the point where I was theorizing that it was just perhaps a path partially built from like all the finders who've gotten lost.
Yeah, I love that theory. I think that I have things to say about that would spoil parts of Arc 10. Is what I think about that.
Well, yeah, I guess people, go to the Discord to hear Jay's thoughts on that, maybe, because we shouldn't go into that too much here today, probably, unfortunately.
Yeah, in terms of Avery, I just think that I think that she's learning to recognize social ills. Like that's her, like she's learning to recognize systemic problems, systemic change. She's learning to work with that system, and like Fernanda pushes her in a big way towards that. At the end of Arc 8 there, she has the brilliant realization that, oh, others are poor people. And that is important because moving forward here, I think she's still working out a few of the kinks. Like she thinks a lot about how they need help, a lot about how they need help from individuals, because that's what she sees. She sees individuals like Miss does. That's why I think Miss picked her as a finder. Like, because finding is pretty much exactly that. Like, it's look at these individual connections without the greater systemic things attached to them. Like, Miss has the connection between her eyes and or between light and her perception. That stays, but she doesn't have eyes. Like, it's just parts of the system that are there, that Avery can pick out and think about and very quickly get to without the larger systemic anything. She doesn't have to think in giant webs of nuance like Lucy and Verona can.
Yeah, I like that. That's a really good point.
But
obviously,
that also means that she says stuff like, hey, why don't we invite a bunch of practitioners in here? Maybe without considering all of the systemic implications of why people would be opposed to
What
that.
a great Avery moment that was. Just like, hey, I've got a cool idea. I'm sure no one will have problems with this if I just bring it up.
My favorite part was that we kind of saw it from Verona's head.
Yeah.
Verona's like, what?
What the fuck are you doing? Yeah.
And then Avery looks at her back up and she's like, I mean, okay. I guess. But I suppose that's probably where this promenade will come into it, because it's a meeting place for the lost. It's got tons of them. It will be the closest we've seen to the lost having a society.
Yeah, exactly. But gods, that moment was just, it's the Kennet version of the Snoogie moment. It's like Avery says it and immediately every other in the room just slowly turns their heads like it's a record scratch, mic feedback, everything.
Again, it's a bit like Lucy with some of those arguments. It's like, look, you're not wrong. They would be helpful, yes, but also read the room.
Yeah. I'm having fun with Avery's arc, even though it's not quite as prominent in these chapters.
Yeah, well, sounds like arc 10 is gonna, at least at the start, be Avery's arc.
Yeah, we'll have to see, I guess.
Yeah. So, I suppose I think that's everything in the notes.
Oh yeah, I now we ask each other questions. That's what we're doing. All right. So in terms of what questions I have for you, something I've wanted to ask for a while is, and this might be more of something to ask at the end of the story, but I'm here now, and maybe I'll be here at the end of the story with you guys talking about this, but gotta take those chances. And plus, this is a question that can be asked twice. How does it feel to be making such politically charged content, to be analyzing such a politically charged story? Was it something you anticipated? Has it changed anything about the way that you view politics or choose to exist in them?
What do you mean politically charged?
Yeah, there's no politics in this story. What are you talking about?
Yeah, I definitely think the answer to setting out to do it is definitely no. I think back in Deep Impact for the first half, I think we had a pretty strict no politics.
Did we?
Sort of. We tried to avoid them, and then it fell apart because we kept not being able to do it. It was a rule that kept getting broken.
That was laughable.
It was a rule that we tried to set up because we thought it would help us stay on track, but really it became more of a hindrance than a exactly.
Yeah. I think it was born also from at least from my end, partially wanting to be apolitical, because that was what I thought was. Anyway, no, but then I do think these stories have pushed me a little bit further left. I was hardly conservative before we sat down to read them, but yeah, I do think particularly Pale, but both stories have made me much more aware of the way these systems can impact and oppress people that you don't notice while you just view the system as this thing that's the normal and good and shouldn't be changed.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah.
I think that's probably some of what it's aiming for.
I think I would add to that a bit just by saying, diving into a story this deeply, especially one that has these themes, as two cishet white men, I think there's always going to be an aspect of it exposes us to new worldviews that allow us to, I don't know, to just be more kind of generally considerate or knowledgeable about privilege and other people's experiences, I guess.
My awareness of privilege would probably be one of the biggest things that's been impacted over the last few years, for sure. But yeah, no, I think that comment, obviously, we are two cishet white dudes, so it was very much it was one of the reasons I was glad early on that we decided to do these things, like these reflecting episodes, to bring on other people, because Pale is a story that needs more voices than just those two.
Ours, yeah.
All right. Yeah. I mean, yeah, that was my big question, and I'm kind of glad to hear that that's the answer. I would be interested to see what a conservative person's live read of this story would turn out like.
I've had some interactions with people who are at least more conservative than myself. In discussions on some Discord servers where people agreed with Corbyn in that one scene in Arc 8, which
Yeah.
was very engaging to sort of see how people come to such a different read on that scene than I did. Um,
The one that stands out to me is the scene. I can't remember what the character's name was, but it was the person whose family is like the goblin janitors. You know what I mean?
Millie
The
Legendre, or
Legendaires.
Yeah, that's
yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Which I just think is such an interesting way to frame a different person's. I mean, that the whole point of that interaction was this person's family and entire worldview is based around this one specific box that they put this group into, and
Mm.
what happens if you try and raise the question of, hey, is that like okay? I
Yeah.
just thought that was such an interesting exploration of some of those ideas and ideals as well.
Yeah, I will say in terms of conservative viewpoints, do you remember that discussion question we ran, Ruben, about whether it was okay for Alexander to forswear Seth, and we got that guy. Oh, sorry, I don't know. It was a guy, who came in, and this person was basically saying that Alexander was 100% correct to do it, and that's still probably my favorite discussion question answer we've gotten because it was so very different to my own personal
And
opinion. It was like the
yeah,
one that gave us the most to work off.
and it wasn't bullshit. Like it was a train of thought that logically flowed from one step to the next, but just from a different starting point, I guess.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I always find that very interesting. I don't know. It reminds me of, here's another reference. I don't know, Jay, if you've ever seen The Good Wife or possibly The Good Fight. I'm not sure as well, but
I have not.
okay. But there's a character in that whose name I can't remember, who is the wife of the husband of one of the most actively kind of like liberal, or at least white liberal characters on the show, who is like very conservative, who is a ballistics expert, who is very into guns.
Oh, fuck, what is his name?
I know. I think it's Kurt. Is it Kurt?
Yeah, it is
Yeah.
Kurt. Yeah.
Anyway, I always find
Yep.
this very interesting because I think it's fascinating the way that clearly very liberal writers write conservative characters in a way that is like they want to have conservatives that have interesting opinions and have somehow justified their kind of conservative viewpoints. And I think that's very fascinating. But we kind of exist in a world where if you're trying to set up conservative, maybe this is being a bit harsh to conservatives, but like it's the breed of conservatism that existed in the 70s or the 80s was at least more veiled, or at least kind of what I would call centrist now, and what a conservative is nowadays. I think there's no rational kind of explanation that you can use to get to today's conservative viewpoints.
Yeah,
Aaron Sorkin's someone who struggled with that. I don't know if you have watched The West Wing or The Newsroom, but he very much, you can tell he's trying his darndest to write conservative characters who had good points, but it's clearly not his opinion. And it's like you can see that he's trying so hard, but that he clearly doesn't believe in what this character is saying.
Mm.
Yeah, I think that's something that Pale also handles pretty well with Sharon is the big one.
Yeah.
Sharon is the most explicit one. Like Alexander and Bristow don't have to be read as conservative if you like ignore all of the everything about the story, but Sharon's the one that's like explicit, and I think he's talked about like how he was trying to strike a balance with portraying her as a real person, but definitely coming down on the side of her ideas being
but
wrong.
That's the funny thing about thinking about Alexander or Bristow as conservative. I mean, like, that's falling into the trap of making something like I don't know. I feel like there should be a difference. I know that this is the line that modern day conservatives have drawn, but I feel like there should be an idea for what conservative can mean that isn't just you don't believe people have the right to exist. You know what I mean? Like, surely there's a world where conservatives exist where that isn't the conservative viewpoint, which is what it currently seems to be. Yeah, I don't know.
I guess capitalize on having a system that doesn't do that to people to
Yeah.
conserve.
Fuck. Yeah. Oh, God.
Anyway.
Anyway.
Anyway, back to your question. What do you mean politically charged?
Yeah, what are you talking about? This show has no politics in it.
Okay, here's my next hot take. Alexander is no, this is gonna age so badly.
Alright,
I'm
let's
gonna
hear it.
regret
Let's
this,
hear it.
but Alexander is the Silicon Valley tech bro. Like he's just as bad as all of the other practitioner families, but because he's new money and not old money, like because he brings a bunch of people together to exploit, he comes off as so much better.
Yeah, oh, that's fascinating. Because I mean, obviously, it's on the nose, but I have directly compared Ray to a tech bro, in the past, in that sense that he fits the one the opinion that I find more understandable or like fixable of like where Ray just thought that by staying out of it he was helping, and he didn't realize that he'd taken a side. Like he had that whole thing where he's like, I must remain impartial, and then like so he's watching students get hurt and he's like, I'm a good person because I'm not taking sides.
Yeah.
And he sort of came around with that. But like some of his opinions around that, a lot of that stuff reminded me of people I knew in San Francisco when we were living there.
Yeah, I think that Ray is also a tech bro. Like,
yeah, but
Ray is the tech bro who follows the Elon Musk.
Yeah,
and the
exactly. Like
Bezos.
Ray wasn't the Elon Musk. Ray was the Wozniak or something. I don't know. I can't think of a household name.
Yeah,
exactly maps to it. But yeah, you're right. Like the comparison to Alexander, I can see that the new money thing. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, because like when you picture like like a lot of like centrists and like liberals, like the liberals but not leftists, a lot of those people like they hear billionaires are evil and they go like, oh yeah, billionaires are evil, but like when they say that, they're picturing the billionaire whose parents were millionaires. They're picturing like the Donald Trump who just inherited all of the money and like is being a terrible person, and they kind of like give a pass to like Elon Musk is now the richest person in the world. Elon Musk is exploits his workers. Elon Musk is like harming the environment almost as much as he's helping it. Like he's not a good person. He has all of the evil that billionaires are, but he gets a pass because he's new money or supposedly new money. Like he got here and sort of got all of these people together and became a billionaire. Like I don't know.
No, I can see that comparison. Bristow was another side of it because he was kind of new money too. He just was trying to be old money.
Yeah.
And then obviously now we have Musa in charge of the Blue Heron Institute, which he's very textually the embodiment of the old money, I would have said.
Yeah. So anyways, that was my hot take.
All right, let's go through some of our other things that we always ask people on this show, shall we?
Yeah.
We've already touched on best Kenneteer. Obviously, Verona is the answer for you, Jay.
Yes.
She is the correct answer.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Wait, where do you still sit on that, Reuben? Because you've been Camp Lucy.
Yeah, I'm
for quite a
still
while.
Camp Lucy. I think I'm going to be Camp Lucy until the end of the story. Lucy is just so endeared me.
Yeah. I mean, again, like we say this every time, but obviously by picking your favorite, you're not saying you don't like the other two. It just feels like something I need to say every time I do say Verona's my favorite. But yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, I agree. Yeah. Should we talk about? We like to usually check in on the arc title.
Yeah.
Shaking hands. So I mean, there are a few meanings for this, right? But just the act of shaking somebody's hands, the act of having your hands shake. I mean, this is
this is one of those ones where I did pull out the official definition again, but I'm not going to bother reading it out this time because it's like I think we all know what shaking hands is. I will say that like there's sort of you do it both for greeting or parting, but also as a thing for like
signing a deal. Yeah.
Yeah.
I wanted to pull out my favorite interpretation, personally, which is that the very literal one where Brett shook his hands a bunch, and that's what broke Verona's backpack.
Oh my god. That's it's a very open-ended definition of shaking hands, but I have to respect it.
It was a very they weren't short shakes; they were very big shakes. But
Okay,
he,
all right, all
he
right.
shook
Oh
them
my-
hands. I mean, I don't know. Like he could have just thrown it
Yeah.
across the room, but he banged it a bunch of times. He shook it.
Yeah. Yeah, there's obviously the dichotomy of shaking hands as a greeting, shaking hands as a deal, versus shaking hands as in you're scared or nervous. I think that's like a lot of this, but I don't know. I struggle to find definitions outside of that or more interpretability. And for that, I kind of like reached a little bit to maybe like there's other sorts of hands imagery that plays into, or hands phrases that sort of play into this, like changing hands with the furs, or caught red-handed also with the furs, like Edith was caught red-handed, Rona was almost caught red-handed. I
Red-handed
feel like that
would be a great arc title if it didn't just kind of tell you exactly
it
what it was going
would.
to do. Like, there's no subtlety in red-handed, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I do like the shaking hands as a goodbye element as well, especially because this chapter ends with setting up the fact that Verona is going to be leaving Kennet at first temporarily,
Oh,
then
no.
possibly permanently. So,
I mean, I don't think it's possible anymore. She did literally
she
go,
did.
I'm not accepting a thing that puts me away from
Well,
Kennet
all that
permanently.
means is that it's the if she leaves Kennet, which she'll be doing it Forsworn as well,
Or at least gainsaid.
Yeah,
or at least gainsaid.
But I mean, we saw
it was pretty strong. Yeah,
we saw what happened to the last guy who tried to gainsay Verona. Like, I wouldn't want to be doing that.
True.
Yeah, I don't know. I have no idea where the story's going with this Verona thing. Is she just going to be gone for a couple of arcs? Are we going to do a time skip?
Who knows? Who knows?
Yeah, but you can find out this Saturday.
Obviously. So we did skip over the very basic thing, which is like we met all the new others in this arc, so they were metaphorical meeting, shaking hands.
Well, the other thing that we like to do with our guests is force them to predict very specific, bold and specific predictions. Actually, I'm just a side note, because we use the word bold and specific predictions all the time. I don't know where that phrase came from, but you know what, Elliot? I heard them using it in Pale in Comparison.
Oh, really?
Specifically the phrase bold and specific predictions. Have you heard that? Am I crazy?
Yeah, no, I heard it too. Because they even like went further into it. It's like, this is a bold prediction, but it's not very specific, or this is a specific prediction, but it's not very bold. So, you're trendsetters, guys.
Molly and Jenny, if you're listening, I love it. Please continue to use that phrase. It makes me very happy.
It's also just, I'm very much enjoying that podcast.
Yeah, me too.
It's exactly what I wanted to see from people who read Pale diving into Pact.
Yeah, I love any excuse to reread Pact. Anyway, so yeah, Jay, bold and specific predictions.
But yeah, who done
All
it?
right.
But usually the framing for this is who done it. I think you're going to have an easier time than some people in the past for part of this answer, but
yeah, no, I don't know. Everyone just seems an equal amount of suspicious right now. No, I don't really. I actually don't have anything for who done it, because like obviously Edith is in on it. Obviously, Marcy seems pretty suspicious at this point. We know that there's something else to it, but I'm not sure what that is. I like the idea that Toadswallow has nothing to do with the murder, but did like sell Edith all those goblin traps.
Yeah,
like,
I can see that.
Me too.
Like, there's the idea that maybe a goblin is involved in the direct being a culprit sense. I kind of don't think that's the case. But
I think if you're crafting this elaborate 10-year plan with the Hungry Choir to kill the Carmine Beast, you don't bring a goblin into that sort of long-term strategizing, except maybe Toadswallow.
And maybe Blunt Munch is the other
That's
one
fair.
that I would keep an eye on, just because, like, I don't know, he hasn't done anything to where I'm like, it's Blunt Munch. But like, we know that Toad Swallow is hiding things from Blunt Munch, and that could go either way. It seems like Toad Swallow's the one being deceptive, but it could always be that Toad Swallow's protecting against a possible Blunt Munch incursion. Also, Blunt Munch is one of the only ones who was like, Blunt Munch and Toad Swallow are the only ones who were in Kennet at the time of Yalda's death.
Yeah, good point. Good point.
And Blunt Munch attended the it's not a funeral yet. Well, the execution.
Yeah, the execution
that
feels
doesn't
like
feel
the
right.
most appropriate term.
Still doesn't feel right. Yeah. So Blunt Munch is a possible candidate for this, but also like, I don't ever get the sense that he would be the type to use practitioner stuff. That seems more like Toad Swallow's deal, or even like Gashwad's deal, not Blunt Munch. So I don't know. Who done it? Edith. Next question.
The bold.
Or next theory.
So bold. Yeah.
I do have, however, my sort of bold and specific predictions. I'm going to start with my least bold and specific prediction, which is that Liz, I'm not sure exactly how you pronounce that, but she will betray the Kenneteers to follow her own goals. However, if she betrays the Kenneteers while she's kind of imitating them, she'll do it only in a way that we have seen reflected by something that the Kenneteers have done. She'll do it only in a way that they would do. So I love it because it's kind of this, it kind of sets some stakes for how they handle this conflict. Like if you handle this conflict violently, you are going to be betrayed violently. If you handle this conflict peacefully, you are going to be betrayed peacefully.
I like that. Yeah.
I like that.
It's kind of this little poetic twist.
Yeah.
Because we've seen like when she has her own goals apart from the people she's imitating, but she does use their methods. Like when she was imitating the violent and ruthless witch hunters, she was violent and ruthless. So hoping that if she's imitating the Kenneteers, she can be more like them. Maybe they'll be good influences.
Yeah, I mean her journey to kind of find her own identity in amongst what she is just such a fascinating concept to me. So how that might play off this finale, yeah, that could be really fun.
And my most bold and specific prediction, followers of my live read will have known about this one for a while. Pale will end on Arc 13, corresponding with the tarot card Death, who rides a pale white horse. The skull in the 5 pillars of humanity is referred to by Alexander as the Pale, and it also corresponds with the ages of the Kenneteers.
Yeah.
Also, Wild Bow has said somewhere that he has meta reasons for why the characters are 13, and that I think that'd be a fun one. Wild Bow has also said elsewhere that Pale will only run for a few months, guys. Don't worry. So, the plan is subject to change. Also, Pact is 16 arcs long, corresponding with the Tower. So, I think I'm onto something.
Okay, yeah, we shouldn't dive into that point too much, but I see where you're going.
No specifics, but
okay.
As a final indicator, the several times referenced April Fool's chapter the other day was labeled 14.12, possibly indicating that the idea that the story would go on for that much longer is in fact a part of the joke.
It's 14 and 12 as well, which are the two numbers on either side of 13. So I can see that. I can see it.
Yeah.
I've heard dissonant responses saying like, oh, but that's Jay, that's just the April Fool's date rearranged. To that I say, yeah, probably.
No.
I mean, the other a joke I think a lot of people missed in that one was as well. The URL actually has a different chapter number. It's
16.9, 16.13,
16.19, which if you take out the teens, is the funny number.
Oh my god. I'm pretty sure that wasn't the key.
Should have
Yeah,
been chapter 4.20. Why wasn't it?
Yeah, I actually was surprised when it was the 12 and not the 20. If this had been last year, maybe it would have been.
Alas. But yes,
Yeah,
that is
okay.
my bold and specific prediction.
13 arcs. Yeah, I can get behind that. I feel like that feels about right for like the amount of shit we have left to deal with.
Yeah, you guys were saying like at the end of arc 7, like, all right, we're getting into the very end of the story, like probably 1 or 2 more arcs. And I was sitting here on my theory of it ending in 13 arcs and being like, nah, we've got 5 more. Don't worry about it.
Well, it's looking pretty good for that, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's about that much to resolve.
Yeah, I think so too. All right. I mean, anything else we want to touch on?
You had a question here, Elliot. Were you going to?
I don't know, we maybe have run out of time. We should chat about this on the Discord, but I'm always so fascinated to learn about how Jay approaches these stories because it's clearly a system that works.
All right. Well, yeah, we can hide that answer in the Discord. So if you want to know how I approach stories, join the Doof Discord.
And the way to get to that is by going to doofmedia.com/Discord. Thank you for joining us, Jay. Just quickly, before we dive into the outro, a quick note. We are going to go back to Pact, which means we'll talk about some stuff with Pact spoilers, but we'll do that after the outro, so if you want to stick around for that, stick around. But yeah, if people want to check out more of your work, Jay, they can find your YouTube channel, JayManiac, or on the Doof Discord, see your live reads.
We haven't talked enough about the YouTube channel. It's also very good and covers even more stories than the other verse, if you can believe such things exist. So it's definitely worth checking out.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff on there. Every so often, I'll just see one of your videos, Jay, and be like, "Oh, you're just like watching all the same TV shows that I'm watching, like Dragon Prince, Umbrella Academy, all the current superhero slate of shows." I guess I'm looking forward to your video on Invincible when that inevitably comes out.
Oh yeah, I'm not sure about a video yet, but I am certainly keeping an eye on that. My next one actually, well, no, I'm working on a video. I hoped to have it out by today. That did not happen. But I'm working on a video that has been in production for a few months, and then after that, I'm planning to tackle Infinity Train for its season 4. So
awesome.
There's more shows that you guys have covered on Media MD.
Yep. I need to go and I still haven't watched season 3 of that.
Not available in Australia, season 3 and 4. I was looking for them. I mean, unless you want to do classic piracy, which Australia's notorious for.
I'm still waiting for season 3 of Young Justice to come out here. It's ridiculous.
It's killing me. Anyway, yeah, so check out Jay on YouTube, JayManiac YouTube channel. We'll I guess we'll put a link in the description as well.
Yeah.
If you want to engage with more great content on the Doof Media Network, you can go to doofmedia.com and find all of the great shows on there as well.
Yeah, we just recently finished recording Pace, so Reuben is busy editing away at it as it releases. But I had a lot of fun playing that, and y'all should go check it out.
Yep. If you want to support all the shows on the Doof Media Network, you can go to patreon.com/Doof Media and become a patron. Supporting us gives you access to all kinds of cool perks, as well as just helping us to do all the things that we do. So, yeah, do it if you would like to.
Don't forget Wildbow's Patreon, patreon.com/Wildbow. You have presumably just listened to the three of us talk for about 3 hours on this story. So if you can support him, you probably should be.
Yep. And with that, shall we go back to Pact?
Yeah.
All right, let's do it.
Yeah, so get out of here, Malia.
All right, let's go.
I love that we have our token has red pale but not Pact.
Yeah, I finally have a single person we can call out now.
Yeah. All right.
So yeah,
I quickly had one thing I wanted to bring up here, which is just obviously the Abyss was back in for a bit, and it really like that 9.12, the fight against the Abyss Beast, felt like the most packed-y fight that we've had in this story.
Absolutely.
Like there
And
was honestly nostalgia for me tied into reading that fight. I was like, oh, these were the days.
I loved hearing you just dance your way around the Abyss in the Pale Reflections episode. It's like, so we've heard a lot about the Abyss, but we have no idea what it is.
Yeah, I hope that was convincing.
I don't know, because I just knew you were lying,
Yeah.
so I'm not the person to ask.
But yeah, it was the same. I kept being like, oh, this fight was so chaotic, which was my way of non-spoilery saying, hey, this was a packed fight, right?
Yeah, it was good stuff.
Yep, and it kind of reminded me just of like everything in Pact, because the Abyss has so much to do with Pact.
Yeah.
But specifically, we met one Abyss practitioner, Crooked Hat is what Blake called him.
Yeah.
And he tilted his hat, and everything around him kind of just was just fucked in the way that the Abyss was. And I felt like that was a bit of the Abyss Beast's presence.
Yeah.
I think I saw a lot of similar motifs there.
Just the way the Abyss is so... It just infects things and stains them. And that way, it was such a perfect Lucy thing to cover, because we just, from her side, you just get to see the stain of the Abyss spread.
Yeah. I was also just delighted when it appeared as a car, like a black Abyss car, because I don't know if you remember, but I answered a Deep Impact discussion question with basically a small fan fiction about...
Oh yeah, it was like a car in a desert or something, right?
Yeah, it was the make a boogeyman out of an urban legend, and I chose the Black Volga that like kidnaps children.
That's a fun little nod. Yeah.
And in that, the Black Volga was in fact the guy's Blackfish. So
oh, that's awesome.
And we kind of saw a lot of that in the in Bathos.
That's gonna be... I know this is a bit of a staple of the Back to Pact things, but I just like, again, I can't wait to see people's responses. Pale people dive into things like the Abyss, and now they actually have a little snapshot of how it works from the Kenneteers. I wonder how that'll change things.
I don't think...
I'd love to see...
I don't think anything could accurately prepare you for the Abyss. It's just so... it's so glum. It's so grim, you know? That's one of the things I'm most excited to get up to in Pale in comparison, because they've talked about the thought of Pale being a much more, you know, I guess family friendly is the right word for it, kind of story. But the Abyss is where that really goes off the rails in Pact, right?
I think it's the difference between the Abyss and the Ruins.
Yeah.
Because the Ruins are they're not exactly the Abyss,
but it's the same. They kind of play a similar role in the story of this like place that starts to shape things around it, right?
Well, it's the sister of the Abyss, right? The material versus the immaterial.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of like perfect for these two stories. Pale has the Ruins, and Pact has the Abyss.
Yeah.
Like Pale is all about the immaterial. Like it's attacking you with these ideas, but it's attacking you on the emotional level, and it's kind of summing up a lot of the stuff that Pact just implied. Like, I've had this whole thing of the seal of Solomon as colonization for like since like towards the end of Pact, but Pale's just hammering that out. And in a similar way, the Abyss doesn't hit you with the emotions of things; it just hits you with stuff. And then like the emotions are left to you. Like the Abyss will make you feel real bad, but it won't just like inject you with the feeling of badness. It'll play your doppelganger's voice out of the speakers when she's saying the most fucked up shit. Like it'll make maggots crawl under your skin and stuff.
It'll make a big giant flesh worm.
Yeah, I had to resist mentioning that actually. For most iconic, as a contender for competing with Rook as most iconic other description.
Oh yeah. I miss the bookworm. I don't know what to call it.
You know who
I don't miss the bookworm.
I miss Defenestration Man. What a character.
Me too. Gods,
What an amazing.
What an overachiever.
I know, right? Oh my god. Anyway.
One last little thing. I've just remembered there's one part, I think it's in the first episode of Pale in Comparison, where Malia was like, I get like scared very easily.
Oof.
So hopefully this book isn't too spooky for me. And I was like, oh, this is gonna be great.
This is gonna be so good. Yeah.
Can't wait for Pose.
What do you all think is the scariest part of Pact?
The scene with Pose probably still lives in my brain rent free the most.
Oh yeah, you mean just kind of all the animals being so
the dirtiness of that fight. Yeah. I think it's going to be great for Malia as a law student because I think she's going to go bananas for the contract negotiation part, and then she's probably going to be riding a massive high after that and get hit with the grotty fight afterwards.
Yeah, I think that was a big moment for me of like, oh, this is the most terrifying that Pact is. But I have a sort of unconventional answer to that question. I don't see a lot of people agreeing with me, but the part of Pact that just lives rent-free in my mind as the most viscerally horrifying part is our introduction to like the what did they call themselves? The lab rats, the rat pack.
Where Mags first meets them in Arc 8?
Yeah. Just because the Pause fight was viscerally horrifying to me because I hate the idea of like, for some reason, like, I hate the idea of bugs crawling on me. That's awful to me, but I hate the idea of like things that are slightly bigger than bugs crawling on me even more, like squirrels, rodents, mice, like they're just alive to me in a way that bugs aren't, and that just makes it just so horrifying. So like her teeth are mouse teeth, like the mouse is inhabiting her mouth, like that was just nope. That was the worst that Pact got from me. By far.
The thing that pushed the Pose one over for me was how oily everything is. Like just that concept of these congealed oils and that like slippery grossness is rubbing up against these cuts and these bites. That was what made that chapter like when I get a cut, like I'm keeping that shit sterile as possible. And the idea that you're rubbing like greasy fungus and shit on it is just whereas I don't know if the mouse living inside me is cool, like
no, I think I could feel it in my face. Like I could feel a mouse's paws like pawing at the inside of my cheek, and I was like, no, nope,
fair enough.
No.
How do you feel about Schatzmugel, Eloise's familiar in Pale?
Oh, just fucking fantastic! Oh my god.
Because that's sort of what I'm picturing when you're talking. Like even like talking about like a mouse clawing on the inside of my face. I'm just picturing Schatzmugel, the tattoo, wandering around.
That's for some reason though. Bugs, especially big bugs, don't really bug me as much as like a mouse. I don't know. And the kind of like pus that Schatzmugel has over his face, that doesn't really bug me either. I know that's probably a big thing, but it's not one of my triggers.
What about you, Reuben?
I don't know.
What was the one part? What's the scene in Pact that lives in your brain the most?
Catherine.
So you're more terrified of the psychological stuff.
I think so. That's just that, and I mean, maybe it's just because of that one piece of art, but it's Lawn Sheep, right?
Yeah, that was a Lawn Sheep piece. Yeah,
it just, oh god, is so horrifying. That idea to me is just so horrifying.
The entire conceit of like, you open a book in the library and it's exactly what would drive you.
Well, yeah, the book of your life, the warped book of your life, right? Like, I don't know. Horrifying. Anyway, how does this relate to Pale? Just a chance to talk about Pact.
Speaking of the Abyss, this is how I'm gonna.
Here we go. Here comes the segue.
I wanted to touch a little bit on. So I'm back on my bullshit again. It's the metaphor of the seal as colonization, but to another example of it that we see actually in Pact. And this, I'm pulling this out because Pale has gotten a lot more explicit with this Pale is exploring this a lot more actively, but this is where I put it together. And it was Corviday's chapter in, like, it wasn't just Corviday's chapter. It was Midge and Green Eyes also had sections in that chapter. But, and like, even lots of people don't think of it as Corviday's chapter at all, and they think of it as Midge's chapter. I think of it as Corviday's chapter because it sealed this for me. Seal. The thing that we see in Corviday's chapter is, I think it relates in a very interesting way to the Oni, because the Seal of Solomon as colonization affects Japan and China in ways that are represented by the Oni. They kind of have enough relation to the ways of the seal and enough relation to, like, Japan and China, obviously, like, while they're distinct from Europe in some ways, they share a lot of cultural history. Like, they can both trace their history to Babylon, Sumeria, Mesopotamia. They've had interactions because they've been on the same continent. So the Oni kind of spoke this language, whereas the others in America, in the Americas, and specifically in North America, kind of didn't. And like, there's no American equivalent to the Oni. And if there is an American equivalent to the Oni, it's Corvidae. Corvidae is this spirit that didn't fit at all within our Western sort of notions, the way that Western practice happens, and was kind of just bound to the seal and then put in the abyss because that's the closest fit, I guess. Like, it's something that struck me as odd, I guess, because he never seemed like a boogeyman.
No,
like, that's not what boogeymen do.
I thought 9.x kind of proved that he wasn't. Like, that chapter from his perspective was sort of like, no, he's like a low-level god, high-level spirit, whatever you want to call him. And he almost used the fact that he was dipping into the abyss and taking stuff from it as a way of misleading people about what he was.
Yeah, and that's why I compare him a lot to the Oni.
Yeah.
Like, he's not like Midge. He's not like the Thorburn boogeyman. He manipulates connections primarily. He's almost like a little bit Fae-like. Like, the Fae all admire the way he
I loved that bit.
plays these connections off of each other. He's a little bit like Schwarzmugel-like, where he curses objects by associating with them. And I just thought it was really interesting to compare, because I had this discussion when I got to the Oni part of the live read. Actually, it was when I was reading, Megafire's essay, Practitioner Supremacy, which is a fantastic work of analysis. I had this argument about whether Corvidae was kind of like the American equivalent of the Oni.
Oh, yeah.
As someone who, like, rallies against colonization and sort of uses these labels against people. And that led to the thought of what became of... Well, it led to two thoughts. One, what became of all of the North American others? Was Corvidae unique in being able to kind of have these labels loosely around him? Or are there more that kind of don't fit in ways that Oni don't fit and are still around? One reason I ask this is because immediately in Lost for Words, is that what it's called?
Are you talking about the
No.
prologue? Blood Run Cold?
Not Lost for Words. Yeah, Blood Run Cold. Immediately in Blood Run Cold, I looked at the Carmine Beast and I was like, that's fucking Coyote. That looks like Coyote. Looks like a lot of the depictions we have of, for those that don't know, the North American mythological figure, Coyote. And so I kind of just wonder. I kind of wonder where all of the North American others went. Whether they slotted into roles like the judges, or how they played with this system. The other thing I think it illustrates is the different ways that the practice and the not practice interact, or could have interacted before the Seal of Solomon took everything over. Because the way we see it happen in Corviday's chapter is so interesting. Like, these people are not practitioners. They are not awakened.
Yeah.
It's kind of just, but they're still like affecting things. They're still affecting things in the ways that now practitioners do. Like, there's the one guy, Corviday's father, I think is how he ends up being referred to, who seems to always be aware of the practice. But then the other ones, it's like substances were thrown into the fire, and from that, their eyes opened. They're only practitioners when they're doing drugs.
Yeah.
But when they're doing drugs, they're practitioners. They're creating this, what we would now maybe call a complex spirit or something. And I just find that really cool.
Yeah, well, that's something Pale has touched on with this idea that Miss has talked about, where the way that they've inducted the Kenneteers hews closer to the old ways, which, not sure what culture she might have been referring to, but definitely that idea that it was pre-Solomon, where it was much more practitioners as an idea were humans that were taken under the wing of an other.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, I agree. It was fascinating to see places where magic was less construed by the seal of Solomon. Yeah,
And I just think it's just awful that now those practices are sort of gone.
yeah.
Like, there's no getting them back. Like, they're lost now in a way. I'm not.
That's a very loaded word.
Well, with lowercase l, but maybe it's
here.
interesting to think about what happens to a type of practice after it is forgotten. I mean, is there something that would happen to it? Would it fall into some type of, I don't know.
Well, my understanding of most of these things is it's basically just whatever the spirits think should happen, and they're quite susceptible to the ideas of what human or patterns and what humans expect. So my guess would just be when those practices get forgotten, it's forgotten by the spirits as well.
Yeah.
It just stops kind of being a thing. And I think that maps to, like, to answer Jay's question about where all the other native North American others have gone. Like, I think a lot of this stuff, my usual process is to tie it back to like the real world. And so sort of like my guess would be that most of them were killed.
Yeah, just like the erasure of North American cultures is represented both practically and
yeah. If others represent the culture and the people, like, unfortunately, it would make sense that a lot of them probably just got killed. Some of them probably got appropriated.
Yeah.
So like that would be my guess. So like a lot of these practices are probably just gone to the point where the spirits probably wouldn't even recognize them anymore.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, but I think you are probably right. I would say that, yeah, some of them have definitely been appropriated. My evidence for that being, I don't know if you've ever heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Yep.
Yeah. So Maslow just flat out fucking stole that from indigenous peoples of North America. Went and listened to them and sort of westernized their ideas and then published them as his own. And I think that that's probably what happened to a lot of these ideas. Yeah, if they weren't outright killed.
Yeah, like I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of like here in Australia as well, there would be a lot of native others that still exist, but they would have become heavily morphed by what Western culture has done to their iconography or whatever.
Yeah,
I actually had no idea about Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's a very recent discovery of mine too, but it's very troubling.
Yeah.
But in any case, that's, I think, most of what I wanted to talk about. Just the idea that there were practices that didn't correspond to the Seal of Solomon, that weren't even predecessors to the Seal of Solomon, but were just wiped out, I guess, by colonization. And that's very sad.
Yep. I mean, I guess it kind of all tracks to the idea if you view, like those practices were probably also much more in tune with nature, just looking at the cultures. Like what the Seal of Solomon did, and the reason it's taken off with humanity is because it benefits the core of humanity, the innocents. It gives them protection. And that's kind of like, that was why Western civilization grew as it did, was because it favored humans over nature, really.
Yeah. And I mean, merely the fact that the people from Native American cultures were not the ones who were trying to fucking conquer everything probably means,
Yeah.
they were a lot nicer to others.
Exactly. Yeah.
I guess there's a possibility the drugs kind of aspect of it, like this collective of people who are mostly just innocent, mostly just correspond to the broader definition of innocent, but become quote unquote practitioners when they're inebriated. I guess that may have been sort of co-opted into the Todd and Barney relationship. That's something that I just thought of. It's not
Interesting.
exactly the same, but
Yeah. I would have almost just viewed those. I wonder if the concept of innocence and practitioners as labels just we're mistaken by trying to apply that to something like Native American practices, because it would have been fundamental. Like there may not have been innocence, but then also like you needed to do something like take these drugs to attune yourself to the spirits and to make them listen to you.
Yeah, there weren't labels. Or even if innocent and practitioner did exist, it wasn't like you couldn't just be one, or you didn't have to just be one.
Yeah.
Like, imagine if I almost thought we were maybe going to play into that with the Kenneteers in the beginning, like if they had established a precedent of only practicing when they were in their outfits, then they might have been able to maintain more of a veneer of innocence, I think.
Interesting. Yeah.
Or maybe like they'd maybe be forgiven for more lies when they're out of costume, but since they kind of haven't done that, it's probably not something we're doing.
I'm sure someone else would have figured out that was possible if that was something you could do.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it's just a little bit possible, but also like I don't know, like what if it's contingent on what if it's contingent on some situation like wild practitioners and contingent on giving others power? I don't know. Maybe something that the Kennet others did could have perpetuated that.
Yeah. I mean, maybe. It's the thing about this magic system. The answer is kind of always, it could be. It's just about...
it's more about what the cost will be than anything else.
It's about, what pieces you need to build the puzzle. Not like any puzzle's possible. You just got to find the right pieces.
Yeah, like if you were forgiven for more lies out of costume, then you would have to be fucking rock solid in costume or you'd be screwed.
And you probably still cop a power decrease in costume.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. But if you build that pattern, then the universe could learn to recognize it. Anyhow.
Yeah.
The idea that, but like, I don't know. I guess this is just me mourning those systems that are no more, because like, the fuck is being forsworn in that system? There's no being forsworn. That's a thing that the Seal of Solomon has.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's about all I wanted to say. So,
yeah, okay. Well, I guess we'll wrap it up there. Yet again, we still haven't really figured out a good way to end these episodes that have back-to-backs, because we already did the outro.
Elliot, I've got a really good way we can do it.